With the little phone things. Yeah. What is this? What's the technology for yeah. Exactly. So, trails and stuff. A lot of work on the trails, a lot of trails.
I went to put my coat on. I walked right in.
Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome to the West Hartford Public Schools Board of Education meeting for Tuesday, January 21st, 2020. Cammie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Aronson?
Here.
Mr. Levine?
Good evening.
Mr. Payson?
Here.
Ms. Poland?
Here.
Dr. Steinberg?
Here.
Dr. Thomas Farquharson?
Here.
Mr. Zdanowicz? Kenya Ferreira? Here. Isabella Gom.
Here. Before we move on to the Pledge of Allegiance, just a quick statement. Over the course of the last few weeks, our West Hartford Public Schools community has experienced a number of losses, including the death of Lance Aldave, a special ed paraprofessional at Whiting Lane School, Mr. Bob Felicki, a science teacher at King Philip Middle School, and student James Oxenon from Conard. To honor their memories, I ask you to join me for a moment of silence. All right, thank you very much for that, and let's all work together to help each other as we move through these losses and their impact on our community. Kenya, would you lead us in the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. We have quite a lengthy agenda this evening, and so if there are no objections, I'd like to revise the agenda order this evening. The first change would be that we will be moving the enrollment projections, which is item 6B1, up underneath new business between items A and B. And we'd also like to move the reports from the student board representatives, item 8B1, to that same place. We'll do them and then the enrollment projections. Are there any objections to that? Okay, great. So do we have student participation this evening? All right, great.
That's on?
And if there are parents who would like to watch from our side, you're welcome to join us on this side of the screen. Bring cameras if you want. It's all you. Great. Thank
We're going to
you.
welcome Bristow Middle School Page Turner Kids, a book review website for kids by kids. Faculty advisor is Melissa Tom, our library media specialist at Bristow, and I also want to acknowledge Steve Cook here. And this is Steve's last week, as you know, as he is moving on to be the Human Resource Director at ACES. And we congratulate Steve on that position. It's been a long-time career goal of his, and we're very proud of him. So.
Hello, my name is Orion Gavish.
And my name is Chris Rauch. We are 8th graders at Bristow Middle School, and today we're going to be showing you our website, Page Turner Kids.
Again, thank you so much for allowing us to come here today to show you what we've been working on for the past couple of months.
Before we get started, we want to give you a chance to learn a little bit about the big pictures in our website, like our idea, our goal, our website, and our collaborators.
How do you find a good book to read? That's the big question that we asked ourselves when coming up with the idea for our website. In the world we live in today, whenever we want to try to find a review about a book we might want to read, the review is always written by an adult. There are no book reviews for kids by kids. That is something that Page Turner Kids strives to change and is the basis for the original idea of our website, a book review website for kids by kids.
One of our biggest goals is letting authors know what kids think about their books through our reviews, something that authors really tend to love. A couple of days ago, an author reached out to us and wrote, expressing, "I love and appreciate that grown-ups have read this book, but truly, I'm most excited when kid readers get to connect with Lou. Grateful her story is still making its way into the world. Happy reading at Page Turner Kids." Lou is the main character in May Respicio's new book. We loved getting this tweet, and this also shows that not only do children care about our books, but authors love it too. Next up, we have our collaborators. Orion Gavish, who created this website during the 6th grade.
And at the end of 7th grade, Chris Rouse joined, and we really began to start producing a lot of book reviews, and Be Where We Are Now was our website.
Lastly, we couldn't have done it without our great librarian here, Bristow, Miss Tom. And she's played a huge part in helping us promote Page Turner Kids and helping us spread the word with all the people who are high up in the book world.
Next, we have the impact that Page Turner Kids has had. Since August, 502 people have viewed Page Turner Kids, and almost 60% of that is from the last 3 months. This is also always increasing, especially with our Twitter promotion and our promotion at book events by Miss Tom.
We now have more than 107 Twitter followers, and many authors reply to what we say. Here are a few replies.
I'm so honored by this thoughtful review. Thank you for reading and sharing. I was absolutely delighted to meet you last week. From Rajani LaRocca, author of Midsummer's Mayhem.
Thanks for the review from SKLE, and hooray! Thank you, Page Turner Kids. So happy your awesome readers get to spend some time with Lou. Let me know what you think, from May Respicio.
In only short 6 months, we've generated a little bit of buzz in the book world, with many authors writing to us because of the book reviews that we have published.
Now we're going to be moving on to our website tour. This is the Page Turner Kids home screen. On this page you can find all of the reviews that we have published so far, and also see what rating we've given each book.
Our rating scale is unique to us, and the amount of books shaded in shows you the rating it has received out of 10. We're also planning to release a rubric on what makes a book a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10 by the end of March. So, this is the newest book review that we've published, The Arithmetist by Brandon Sanderson. And this is again our rating system, with the Certified Book Award given out to the best books.
So then we have our About the Book section, which gives us a spoiler-free original blurb of the book, similar to the one you might find in the back of a book, but it's all original content.
After that, we move on to the actual review portion of the review. The review portion is all originally written and is pretty objective, focusing more on the elements of writing rather than the plot of the story.
Lastly, we have a conclusion allowing you to purchase the book from a variety of places, including R.J. Julia Booksellers, which is a local bookseller, and they are very prominent in allowing authors to be able to come and visit Bristow.
And before we move on, one of our newest features that we have on the website is that readers can rate the books themselves, with this allowing what rating would you give this book if they've read the book before.
So, here's where you can get around to the website, along with a calendar of all the reviews we have published, which is approximately 50 to date, mostly written by Orion and myself, with a couple of guest reviewers.
Speaking of which, we are constantly encouraging people to submit reviews on our Submit a Review page, which allows kids who are in elementary, middle, and high school to submit a review, with elementary school students not having to write as much as the middle or high school.
So this is, as previously mentioned, our Submit a Review page, where kids under the age of 18 are able to submit a review by filling out the title, author, genre, ranking, about the book, and their actual review.
Speaking of, So that's the website, and now we'll get back to the presentation. So,
on most weeks, I'll do reviews on Wednesdays, and Orion does reviews on Fridays, with the occasional guest submit a review being published on Mondays. However, we are always looking for more people to submit reviews, and eventually want guest reviews to become a regular fixture on Mondays, and maybe even Thursdays as well.
And then on to the exciting portion. Some of the features that we've already implemented in the website are the Genrenator, which is a way to organize the website by different genres, and elementary reviews, allowing students in grades K to 5 to write reviews as well, but ones that are shorter and easier to read.
We also have many advanced readers' copies, or ARCs, including Wayside School Beneath the Cloud of Doom by Louis Sakar, a very famous author.
Furthermore, we are always looking for ways to improve, and in the next year, plan to add a Top 5 Reviews of the Month page, a rubric on how to score books as part of our Quest Type 3 project, and our biggest project, a podcast, which is a new way to hear reviews plus more in a podcast, more likely coming out later in the year. So, in elementary school, I went to Morley Elementary, and their motto was, "Where readers become leaders," something that we truly believe can be possible with kids who read and participate in Page Turner Kids, whether it be by submitting a review or finding a great new book to read on the website.
We've already been successful with getting some authors interested in Page Turner Kids, and we're sure that with the help of West Hartford teachers and schools, Page Turner Kids will be able to inspire future generations to be readers who became leaders, just as we were taught here in West Hartford. So, any questions?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I just want to say that I am so impressed and so proud of the both of you. Oh my, and your team and all of those that are working to support what you're doing. This is excellent. My 6th grader is a prolific reader, so I will definitely be telling her about your website, and you may get some submissions by her as well. But so proud of you. Keep up the wonderful work, and you're doing wonderful things.
Thank you for the great idea to give my students for homework over semester 2 for extra credit. If you don't mind, I'd like to pass it on to some middle school students. I have some avid readers that I think would love to get involved with what you're doing. I think it's really impressive. I love the fact that you're showing us your passion and involving those around you. So good job.
And I just want to thank the board, because I think this is an example of what happens when districts like West Hartford support having certified librarians in all the schools, and not many districts in Connecticut can say that. So I brag about that all the time. So just thank you for all your support. And they have business cards if anybody would like one. So they can give that to you if you're interested.
We would not have expected anything less. This is fantastic. I have a question. What are, name 1 or 2 books that you would recommend for anybody who might be watching right now?
Rated, which is actually a pretty new book, and we have a review on it, but it was a very good book and an interesting read. Futuristic.
And I've read The Way I Used to Be, which is a little bit more advanced. It's a little bit sad, but it's really eye-opening, and it's a great read for anybody who's like ready to be inspired.
Well, I'm inspired. So thank you so much for sharing. Oh, go ahead, Lorna.
Another question. Possible future authors amongst the two of you, between the two of you by chance?
Maybe.
We haven't really considered that, but that could be something we'd love to do.
All right. You certainly have the foundation for it.
Thanks.
Good job.
So I myself am a Bristow alum, and as Miss Tom knows, I spent so much time in the library. So it really makes me so proud to see this come out of the school where I was, because this is such an incredible thing, and I'm still going to be under 18 for a few more months, so I will be posting some reviews, and I will let my friends know about it, because this is awesome. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Has anyone signed up for public communications portion of the meeting? It looks to me like that's empty, but okay. Then we will move along to unfinished business. And the first item is the ratification of the West Hartford Administrators Association contract, with a recommendation that the Board of Education ratify the negotiated agreement between the West Hartford Administrators Association and the Board of Education for the period of July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2023.
Good evening, everyone. As outlined by our board chair, before you for approval is a ratified agreement between the Board of Education and our Administrators Association. That is our leadership team and our extended leadership team. So it's a group of 55 individuals that's comprised of our principals, our assistant principals, department supervisors, as well as several director level positions around the district. Before we get into the highlights of the agreement, we wanted to spend a couple of minutes just to talk through the process, which began back in October. So the management team was comprised of the three of us, as well as board member Amanda Aronson and our outside counsel, Jessica Ritter from Shipman and Goodwin. And our team met with the association's team several times through the fall, through what we would classify as normal negotiations. But through that process, we were not able to come to a settlement. So at that point, both sides agreed to bring a mediator in, and a mediator meets with both sides. It's an outside neutral party who attempts to bring the parties together, see if there's any common ground for a settlement. And that took place right before Thanksgiving, literally Thanksgiving week, if I'm not mistaken, right? So during that process, the mediation process, we were not able to come to a settlement either. So at that point, we had both agreed to begin the process towards arbitration. But we agreed to keep the dialogue open during that time period. So between mediation, which was right before Thanksgiving, and then over that break, we ended up continuing that dialogue with the association and reached this settlement on December 2nd, which was that Monday right after Thanksgiving break. So it's a 3-year contract. It goes into effect July 1st of 2020 and runs through June 30th of 2023. And it really highlights 3 areas: wages, healthcare costs, and then an adoption leave policy. The wage package calls for a 7.77% wage increase over those 3 years, total increase. So that includes general wage increase and then step increases. So that's a total wage increase of 7.77%, which can be broken down into 2.77% in the first year, which includes step, 2.33% in the second year, which includes step, and 2.67% in the third year, which includes step. We'll also agreed to increase the annuities by an additional $250 a year in each year of the contract as well. So this contract is in line with other settlements that we had seen throughout the fall with other administrators associations around the state of Connecticut. In terms of health care, you will recall that we moved all of our employees and their dependents over to the Connecticut State Partnership Plan effective July 1st. So we don't have any control over the plan design. That's a plan design that the state has for all of its employees and retirees, and we are now part of. So that wasn't part of this negotiation process. What we did have control over was the healthcare cost contribution that employees make towards those premiums. So we did increase those contributions from 20% to 22% over the course of this agreement. That does put our administrators as the group with the largest premium cost share of any groups between both the Board of Education and the town. We also agreed to increase, amend the dental contribution, not increase, amend it to, so that it is in line with all of our other contributions that are, other groups make towards dental insurance. And that's 20% for any line of coverage that an administrator selects. So if they have individual coverage, it's 20%. If it's individual plus one, or family, it's still 20% for all 3 lines of coverage. We also formalized an adoption leave policy, which will calls for up to 10 days leave for an adoption of a child, and then up to 5 days leave for non-birth parental leave. So before we turn things over to the board for any questions that you had before voting, we did want to say that we do feel that this is a fair contract, does recognize the respect and value that we have for our administrators who work tirelessly to ensure the success and achievement of all 9,400 of our students. And we also feel it balances the challenges that we face from an economic standpoint. Certainly wages and healthcare costs are drivers in our budget, and we appreciate the willingness of our administrators to work with us in these key areas. So that summarizes the agreement. We'd be happy to answer any questions that the board had.
Do we have any administrators on like a 10-month contract, or are they all yearly?
We do, yeah. So our principals, assistant principals, and directors are all year-long contracts. Our department supervisors are either 200-day contracts or 205 days. So the difference between the 200 and 205 is our pupil services department supervisors are 205 days. All other disciplines are 200 days. So essentially 10 plus months. So they do work over the summer, but not exclusively.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, looking for a motion then to approve the contract as negotiated.
Make a motion to approve the contract as negotiated.
A second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay? Abstentions? The ayes have it, motion passes. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we are going to move to reports from student representatives in light of the fact that midterms start tomorrow, and we expect ourselves to have a long meeting this evening, and we don't want to have to make you wait till the end. We'd love to hear from you, so who wants to go first?
Happy New Year, long time no see. So I blinked and I have midterms tomorrow. We all have midterms. This week through Monday, which marks the end of semester 1, Conard will be having therapy dogs visiting on Friday in order to de-stress. Backtracking all the way to December, we had our junior planning night, which was well attended. Juniors are prepared to start the process that I am gladly finishing. But course selections are underway as students meet with their teachers and counselors for recommendations for the upcoming school year. Congratulations to our student athletes who signed their national letter of intent: Maddie Lopole, Ali Schneider, Nathan Rinaldi, Nicole Denal, and Kate Bell. Girls and boys basketball plays Hall this week. Good luck to both of our athletes. On December 5th, Acting 2 students invaded our hallways with Fictional Character Day. So students researched a character of their choice, and they were to act as that character the whole entire day. One example was this girl dressed up as Pinkalicious. She was very preppy, pink. She had cupcakes, and so we had to draw or color in a cupcake, and I drew like 3 because I wanted 3 cupcakes. But we also began a partnership with Sandy Hook and their Start With Hello campaign. So we wore name tags all day, allowing us to make connections with other members of our Conard community. We look forward to February 6th, where they will be coming to Conard for a school-wide assembly. On December 10th, Conard celebrated our annual Human Rights Day, ran by Ms. Esposito and her human rights students, as well as future educators of diversity, teaching the freshman class on the significance of human rights. On December 11th, students were able to see presenters Steve Kutcher, John Pinney, and Dawn LeBlanc sharing their vision on computer science and the STEM field. On Friday, December 20th, I think, we held our school-wide pajama day for CCMC, while students from Ms. Geyer's Family Development class attended Charter Oak and spent the day observing, teaching, and learning with students of their assigned class. Un segundo. Our food drive was a success as Mr. Duarte and Mrs. Martin delivered 1,200 non-perishable food items to Nancy Stockman of the West Hartford Food Pantry. And finally, we're in 2020. January 3rd, diversity and inclusion discussion was great to see former students come back and indulge in discussions that are important to the growth of our community. We hope to continue with these in the future. College Knowledge Night was last Wednesday, and it was a great turnout. Representatives from different schools participated in a panel discussion which families found to be very informative and helpful. Congratulations to our 4 students who have been accepted into the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards: Patricia B., Ian N., Ryan Smith, and Amanda H. Tomorrow is the 8th grade parent night from 7 to 9 at Auditorium. We are happy to welcome and introduce our future freshmen and their parents to the Conard community. And from the student lens, we just want to thank the Conard faculty for the abundance of support in losing one of our students. It's nice to know that you have a family sometimes when you don't have someone to turn to, but the staff made it known that they were there for us, so we really appreciate that. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. In the past few weeks, our students have been busy with a variety of activities from clubs to sports as we wrap up the semester. In December, Fashion Club hosted a successful coat drive throughout the month of December for Button Up Connecticut. Right now, our Feminist Coalition and the Young Democrats Club are hosting a feminine hygiene project drive through the end of the month, and they will be donating everything they collect to a women's shelter in Hartford. DECA, the Distributive Education Club of America, formerly known as Business Club, is doing a clothing drive through the end of the month to raise money for their state and national competitions. Aislinn Mitchell is holding a used prom dress drive to donate to Christina's Closet, which helps provide accessible prom dresses to students in the spring. We also had a great Pajama Day fundraiser for CCMC, and at Hall we raised a total of $1,600. Our Cocoa and Cram event is tomorrow night, where freshmen get help studying for their midterms from upperclassmen. In terms of sports, the boys soccer team won the CHSCA Team of the Year, which is exciting, and 3 of our football players made the All-State team. Our second student-directed black box show of the year, The Dining Room, will be February 5th through the 8th. And we are already in the midst of rehearsing for our Pops and Jazz show, and we just recently had auditions for our musical in the spring, the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. In December, the Thirst Project came to do a presentation to our school about the work they've been doing building wells to provide accessible clean water in developing communities. And our advisory classes are holding a fundraiser until the end of the month, and so far we have raised over $2,000 to contribute to that effort. So tonight, as we prepare for our week of exams, we are excited for the upcoming semester and everything we have in store. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Lots going on across the district. All right, so we are going to move to our multi-year enrollment projections, and it is my pleasure to call to the table Mr. Chip Ward and Liz Hewitt to report. Welcome back. I'll just quickly add that student representatives, you are welcome to stay for as long as you would like. When you feel like you need to go home and study, it's all to you. Thanks.
I've already forgotten. It's amazing how quickly you forget things. Well, good evening, everybody. It's my great pleasure to be back here and see many familiar faces and many new faces. I'm sure that West Hartford Public Schools is in tremendous shape, and I'm just excited to be back here and share with you my 20th or 21st multi-year enrollment projections. I've been doing this since around 1999, and I'm pretty sure this might be my swan song because we will pass the torch on to my dear good friend Liz next year. So she's going to take copious notes. So what I'm doing here is talking about the multiple, let me just get everything is the multi-year enrollment projection. So we're not looking at what's happening next year, but we're looking at what's happening out in the next 10 years. And so before I talk about what's going to happen in the next 10 years, I want to sort of put it in historical context. And so as you see in this graph, this is from 1947-48 all the way up through the current year. And the blue line represents the total enrollment K through 12 in the West Hartford Public School District. And you can see the impacts of the baby boom. You know, we started at around 5,500 students in the 1946-1947 school year, and the next 10 years it grew to almost 12,000. Now, I'm sure as a Board of Education you realize you're dealing with a lot of weighty issues. It's quite a bit different than when you have 800 new kids a year coming into your school system. That must have been just an incredible time to be in the Board of Education, where you had to build basically half a whole high school every year. Then things sort of tapered off, and it grew through the 60s and peaked almost around 13,000 students. There were 2 high schools, there were 4 middle schools, there were 15 elementary schools at that point in time. And then from around 1970 through the mid-1980s, the enrollment dropped dramatically from around 13,000 students to a little over around 7,500 students. You notice it's a little bit higher than it was at the trough in 1946-47, so it grew overall. But again, during that time, the district was losing somewhere, which is the purple line in the right axis, somewhere between 400 and 500 students a year. So every year you had one less elementary school in the district. And so that was a time of great transition in the district. The high schools switched from being 10-12 to being 9-12 schools. You went to 4 middle schools they became just 7-8 schools, and you had K-6 schools, and you went from I think 15 down to 9 at the peak, at the trough. And then from that point onward, the enrollment gradually grew as the echo of the baby boom. You can see that in the graph for the next 20 years or so till around 2010, 2011, where the enrollment peaked at just above 10,000 students. And it was growing, but at a more modest clip of around 200 to 300 students a year. And then since that time, have had a steady decline from around 10,000 students to closer to 9,300 students now in the current year. And the decline has generally been around 100 to 200, around 100 students a year. Some years it's been 100, some years it's been 0. But as you can see, though, that sort of gives you the history of where we're at. And so what we want to try and do is now project I try and predict 10 years into the future, primarily to inform the capital improvement plan in terms of what types of buildings you're going to need. Obviously, if this was the 1950s, I'd say build everything as quick as fast as you can. And in the 1980s, it was a more measured, 1990s, it was a more measured growth. We added, we opened up 1 elementary school, we opened up 1 middle school, we expanded the high schools, we expanded the existing plant. So, in order to project the enrollments, the first place we start is with the births. And so this chart shows you the births both in West Hartford, which is the black line on the left-hand scale, and the births in the state of Connecticut, which is the purple line in the right-hand scale. Births through around 1990 were very similar at both West Hartford and the state of Connecticut. State of Connecticut peaked at around 50,000 births in 1990 and has been gradually dropping every year since. So now it's dropped in total by about a third to around under 35,000 students. While the number of births in the state declined, the number of births in West Hartford continued to grow through the 1990s as we saw a lot of turnover in the housing market, smaller, younger families coming in. And our births actually peaked in 2001 and then in 2004 were the 2 peak years where we had over 725 to 750 births. And since then, we were in a pretty steady decline until just this most recent year, so 2018, not 2019, we don't have that information yet, it's 2018, where the births ticked back up again to 600 students. So tells us a little bit about what that drives the enrollment when they come to kindergarten the next year. And in order to project enrollments, we use what's called the cohort survival ratio. And that's this fancy term that really is just the simplest way to explain it. Now I could say it is, we assume history is going to repeat itself. So the cohort survival ratio is just the ratio of a cohort of students as they move from one grade to the next. So for instance, in 2019, we had 611 second grade students compared to 602 first grade students the prior year in the fall of 2018. So the CSR in that case is just 611 divided by 602, or 1.015. So that means we're going to get 1.5% more second graders than we had first graders. In 2019, we had 701 sixth graders compared to 735 fifth graders the prior year. So the cohort survival ratio is 0.9537. So we're going to lose about 4.5% of our sixth graders from fifth grade to sixth grade. And then the other cohort survival ratio those are just the individual grade levels. We also track birth to grade K. This cohort survival ratio will move around a bit more. We'll talk a little bit about that because it's covering a 5-year gap. We have a complete census of everybody who was born in West Hartford in a certain year, and we have a complete census of who's enrolled in kindergarten 5 years later. We don't have the census information in between that time, so we use that 5-year cohort. So in 2019, we had 611 kindergarten students, we had 593 births 5 years previously, so the cohort survival ratio was 1.0304, so roughly a little over 3% more first graders, kindergartners than births. So what does the cohort survival ratio account for? It accounts for all of those major factors that drive the enrollment trends. One is families moving to West Hartford for the schools. Second, when we see that throughout the elementary years, families choosing to send their students to private parochial and magnet schools, we see that most notably in the 5th to 6th grade transition. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Families coming or leaving West Hartford due to economic reasons. We'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about the birth to K ratio. And then the turnover in the real estate market as new families move in and old ones move out. And so we generate we use these types of cohort survival ratios along with the birth rates and our current enrollments to be able to project those enrollments 10 years into the future. Obviously, we only have births for the last 5 years, so once we get beyond year 5, we're sort of estimating what the births are going to be. So the value of the accuracy of the projection decreases as you go out farther in the years. And there's in the detailed report, I don't have a chart here, but you can see the various comparisons of the enrollment projections. So first we'll start with the birth to grade K cohort survival ratio. This has been as high as like 1.18 one year, so that's why the chart goes all the way up there. We're 18% more kindergartners than we had births the 5 years previously. But for the last 10 years, which is what this chart shows, from 2009 to 2019, the ratio has been a more typical modest increase of around 1.02 or 1.03, with the exceptions of those 3 years that you see, 2014, 2015, 2016, where we had just massive losses of kindergartners compared to births 5 years ago. I mean, at the time, that was five years ago, we did extensive research. We looked at, well, did they go to magnet, did they go to private school kindergartens? Did they go to magnet school kindergartens? We have all that data available to us. And no, they didn't. They just lost. And I got to believe it's something tied to the Great Recession that occurred in 2009, where we just lost families that moved out because because of the recession. They found jobs elsewhere in the country. But since that point in time, since the economy has sort of turned around, our birth to grade K cohort survival ratios returned to a more normal range of between 1.02 and 1.04. And the last column in that chart is called base. That's our base case assumption. We just use the simple 3-year average of the last 3 most recent years to give an indication of what we can use to plug into the model to generate the mathematical projections going forward. So what we do is we do this for birth to grade K, K to 1, 1 to 2, for all the 13 different grade level transitions that we're tracking. And so this I don't go through all of them in great detail, but this one just shows you sort of the average cohort survival ratio over the entire K through 12 thing, and the graph ranges from 0.98 to 1.02, so it's a very narrow range here because we're averaging over the entire district. And you can see in 2014, 2015, as a result of that low birth to K ratio, we had much smaller ratios down below 1, which was unusual for us. And then they came roaring back in 2016, 2017 to over a 1% average increase year over year. And so that impacts what the overall enrollment projections are going forward. For 2019, it was about a 1.0035, so about 0.35% more students this year than last year. And the base is just the simple 3-year average, which is about 1.058. So then back to that original chart, which we have the historical data on the left, which we've already talked about, and the data that's in the shaded part of the graph on the right is the 10-year projections. And so a couple things to point out in those 10-year projections. So you can sort of see finally a leveling out of the baby boom echo at the tail end of that, at the tail end of the 10-year projections in the 2029-2030 school year, where we're projecting we're probably going to bottom out at around 8,200 students, which is about 1,000 students below where we are now. And then I suspect we'll have, well, we should have a baby boom echo after that point in time. But you see, we started in 1947, 48 at around 5,500 kids. We went up, then we went down. We bottomed out around 7,500. We went up, we went down, and we're bottoming out around 8,200. So we're still seeing that overall growth in the district. So what's more interesting is sort of what the overall enrollment projections are at the grade levels here. And so we'll take a look at this from, we'll first take a look at the elementary, which is that top red line. It peaked at, elementary enrollments peaked at around 4,700 students in the 2010-2011 school year. I believe we had 229 or 230 elementary sections at that point in time. We've dropped to under around 3,900 students now, so a drop of around 800 elementary students over the last 10 years. It's slow, gradual decline. And obviously the number of elementary sections dropped to, I think, 199 this year. And then as the enrollment, now that we've gone from those basically 700 students per grade class sizes to around 600 student per grade class sizes, we're now sort of settling out at this new level, and we don't expect much change in the elementary enrollments going forward. We're going to be roughly somewhere between 3,700 and 3,800 through the next 10 years. The next line down, the blue line, is the high school line. The high schools have been hanging out between 3,000 and 3,200 students for the last 10 years. And we're probably going to be doing that for about the next 3 years. And then this elementary decline is finally going to start hitting the high schools. And we're going to be dropping the out years to somewhere around 2,700. I don't think we've reached the bottom of that in the out years there. And the bottom line is the middle school enrollments, where our middle schools enrollments have stayed relatively constant at around 2,200 students, plus or minus 50, again for the last 10 years. And we're now just beginning to hit that decline. So over the next 3 years, the enrollment's going to drop to around 1,900 students in the midterm, and then drops maybe closer to 1,850 middle school students in the out years. So again, that sort of gives you an overall history. These enrollment projections, when I was doing them in the 1990s and the aughts, were much more exciting because it was like, oh, well, where do we need to build next? So, I mean, the good news is from the capital standpoint in terms of raw classroom space, you guys have enough classroom space with to handle the future enrollments. And I don't print out here in this in the presentation, but in your board packet you've got detailed school by school projections in terms of what the projected enrollments are for the schools, and then what the the classroom needs are going to be. And so everybody is in very good shape. And so that's it, and we'll be glad to answer any questions that you've got.
I just wanted to note that I don't have any questions at this point, but I just wanted to thank you because the extended information that we have is very detailed, and I'm glad we have some time to digest it and look it over as we have been over the last week or so since we've gotten it. So thank you. It's a tremendous amount of work and obviously critical to their planning, so thank you.
The data provided is district-wide. Were there any areas based on how we do our districting that did not fit this pattern?
What sort of pattern do you mean?
Meaning, like, should we be worried about certain districts where there's a lot of kids, present, or where there's just an abnormality with the data?
No, I mean there's variation. So when I do the enrollment projections are most accurate at the district level and in the short term. As you go narrower, the enrollment projections get a little bit less. But there's nothing, the enrollment projections look very similar across all the elementary schools. We're gradually decreasing enrollment in the elementary schools. The middle schools both look to be impacted in the same fashion as we get to the next phase. As I noted in the report, just the way the enrollments are going, there's going to be more of a drop-off at Hall High School in the out years than there's going to be at Cotter High School in the out years.
One of the things this is, and Chip would say, this is what makes kindergarten planning so difficult, is that it's hard to project where. And like, so when you look at it, even in the years where we've had 100 students lost, and it's all really been the elementary schools, but then you figure there's 11 elementary schools, so that's 9 students per school spread out over 5 grades. I mean, if they all came from the same place, it would be so much easier. But like Whiting Lane, we had seen decreasing numbers. We planned what those numbers would be. And then we had 9 move-ins in the last week before registration and after the start of school. So you have 2 kindergarten sections you assume are going to be 18 each, and all of a sudden they're 20 sections of 23. And that's the kind of thing that, Duffy had a short bubble down, but then it kind of leveled out. So it's just each year, each grade's a little different. And I thought you were going to get to district questions. Chip, do you want to talk about a little bit some in our area and because really in the state, the only 2 districts that are seeing significant growth, South Windsor and Rocky Hill have seen significant move-in patterns that are interesting over the past few years. But in our area, we've seen more significant declines.
Yeah, so I mean, our drop in the enrollment has been roughly like 1,000 students over 10 years, so 10%. I mean, other districts have seen 15 and 20% drops. The district I live in used to have 450 kids per class graduating. Now they have 220 kids coming in kindergarten. So there are, it's just a smaller N, and our N is not dropping nearly as fast as other districts are. And there are other districts like South Windsor and, as you said, Rocky Hill that are just growing leaps and bounds. So.
I'm trying to find the silver lining with space, FTEs, and a few popped out to me when reading your data as well as the graduation requirements that we discussed or will discuss. And I was wondering speaking from personal experience, I know there's a huge pre-K demand in town as there's a lottery. And will this provide space? I was wondering, and when you factor in this data of how many, kind of move on to the next year, I was thinking, well, there's some that didn't get in. And I couldn't help, but this might be more for Tom, but is the silver lining here that maybe we have more space to expand our pre-K program?
So I only look at the enrollment projections K through 12. So because the pre-K not everybody's not eligible for pre-K. It's only, you're limited in terms of you have 112 slots or something like that for pre-K in the district. Whereas for kindergarten, everybody who is kindergarten eligible goes to kindergarten. So that's 600 slots. So you need to expand pre-K, you need to find 500 slots. Not sure you've got, some of the space that was added at the elementary schools was in nature of portable classrooms, because we knew this was sort of at the time there was sort of a bubble, and those portable classes have been removed. You may not have, you'd have to take a more careful look in terms of where you could add additional pre-K classrooms.
It's been a goal of mine to expand it, and I thought that would be in partnership with the state. One of the issues is really, we also accept Smart Start funding grant, but as part of our accepting that grant, our pricing for our pre-K is tied to a state pricing. If we expand it, which is something the board can do, it's just you'd be funding that entire program, and we'd have to charge differently than we do to make it even possible to maintain it. So it's something that's possible. It can be a board goal. It can be a board initiative over time. Like anything else, the issue will be the cost of it. But yeah, I mean, we have areas where there is more space available, whereas previously, I mean, Chip and I, 10 years ago, Bob Palmer, Chip, and I were at Aiken looking at a all-brick equipment storage area, trying to figure out how can we make this into a classroom. Because we thought it was that much that we'd have to make like a 12-person classroom. And then we didn't get that boost, and then it kind of leveled out at Aiken. So you may have space there now, and that's the kind of place where you could do some expansion. I do think for it to work, it would have to be part of tied to a major state initiative too, to get the grant funding for it.
So I wish we hung out more. I found your data really interesting. So I wish I had more years of you. But one of the questions I had when reading your data was, have you been in contact with private school counterparts? Because I know when the economy kind of tanked, I think as you said, private school enrollments I'm sure changed. And I'm wondering, are there projections similar to ours? Should we expect an influx of students or students leaving, I think around 5th or 6th grade? I saw a little dip in some of the numbers, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
So I didn't get an opportunity this year, but in prior years' reports, which are up on the web, you can see all the, I track all the other options for West Hartford residents, which is both interdistrict magnet schools, which grew substantially from like 170 students in the interdistrict magnet schools in 2006, 2007 to 500 in 2017, 2018, and then track private schools. Now, private schools don't seem to be really impacted by the economy. I guess is the easiest way to say this. There's just a steady stream of West Hartford residents that choose to go to private and parochial schools. The number of students when we did have way back when we had half-day K, and when we moved to full-day K, we saw a substantial drop in the number of private school kindergarten students because we offered a program that many of the working parents wanted at that particular time. K through 5 has stayed relatively constant. Grade 5, grade 6, 7, and 8, that's where two things happen. One is you switch from the elementary school to the middle school, so that's a natural break point, and that's also where there's a lot of more capacity opening up. There are number of private and parochial middle school onlys in our town, or where they add additional teachers, to get to a larger group size. So it's a combination of supply and demand that we see this sort of 5% drop off. Typically, we also see a 2 to 3% return when you get to the 9th grade. So I mean that they some of them go away for middle school and then they come back for the high schools.
Just one question as well. When we talk about counting people, I can't help but mention the decennial census, which is coming up later this spring. So just a good opportunity to remind people, when you get your postcard in the mail, you can go online to complete your census form, or you can make a phone call, or you can wait until the packet comes and do it on paper, if that's your preference. If you don't do those things, you'll get a knock on the door. But so my question is, will the census data, once we receive it in 2021, help inform any decision making, at least around like those 2, 3, and 4-year-olds? Like, we'll know where they live at that point, I guess.
No, not really, because we get sort of K5 data by census tract, and I think there are 8 or 10 census tracts in this, and they don't line up with our elementary attendance zones, so it doesn't really help. So I mean, the key thing is when you're building your budget, as I used to do for many years, and now Liz is going to be doing it, is you just build in some flexibility in terms of, we know how many kindergarten students are going to be there. We do make a projection as to where we're going to staff kindergartens, but we don't just say, okay, we need 195 sections, so we're only going to budget for 195 sections. We've always budgeted a little bit more than what the direct numbers show, because we know historically we get breaks in the wrong direction. So you provide for that flexibility and let the administration use those positions as the enrollments happen over the summer. I gather I'm glad I missed this summer, because it sounds like I would have turned my hair whiter after, because that's a very unusual set of circumstances that happened this summer. Both the drop in one and then the dramatic growth in the other. It's like they went, 9 kids should have gone to Duffy and they ended up at Whiting Lane,
Thanks, Chip. It's good to have you back. One of the things I was thinking about is that, I understand the cohort survival methodology and how you have your base, your last 3 years. the economy. You mentioned that in times where it wasn't doing so well, we've had less births. The economy's doing well. It has been for a couple of years now. Is there any number in that survival methodology that kind of takes that into account? Should we see, and if not, then should possibly we see more births because of the economy and take that into account?
So a couple thoughts on that. One, if I could figure out how to adjust this numbers for the economy, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on some island in the Virgin Islands, just typing in and playing hedge fund. So no, that's a very challenging task. But at the same time, recognize that when we do these projections, we're only doing projections of changes. Okay, I mean, we're talking about is it a 1% change or is it a 2% change? It's not going to be a 20% change, and it's not going to be a 20% negative change. So that provides, so we have time to make those changes. In terms of your budgeting, you build in some flexibility in the budgeting to deal with those last minute types of changes that happen next year, and then we adjust. So so like for instance, the bursts had been dropping significantly to like 560, and they popped up in 2018 to 600. Well, that could signal that maybe we're going to start getting more kids in kindergarten. Well, they aren't going to show up until kindergarten until 2023. So you've got plenty of time to plan and react for that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. You're invited back next year, of course.
Thank you.
You get open seat anytime.
Or anytime between now and then as well. Thank you
all very much.
You sit and watch us if you want.
I'm sure he does. Thank you.
Tuesday night.
Yeah. They don't get in your town now.
Oh, it's on the web.
And I'm just looking ahead at the remainder of the items on the agenda, and I'd like us to take just a 5-minute break so we can take care of any business we need to take care of before we resume. So, is it not adjourned, but we'll be in recess until 8:05. Thank you.
What I was hoping that I'd get, that yours gave me, was hope. Like, I don't think you're hitting.
Bye.
It's the way we did in California.
All right, I'd like to call the meeting back to order. Thank you for your indulgence and your patience during our break. And we will move on to item 5B, presentation of the capital improvement plan for 2020-2021. The recommendation is that the Board of Education receive the capital improvement plan for 2020-2021 and begin the process of reviewing for final approval and adoption at the February 5th, 2020 Board of Education meeting. February 4th, sorry about that, Board of Education meeting. So again, this is not for us to vote on this evening, but just to receive the presentation and ask any questions that we have. And I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Morrow.
Thank you. As was explained, this is something that we do every year, and wanted just to give a little bit of an overview. The last 10 years, as you've seen from the documentation, have primarily been a steady maintenance budget for us. We are requesting an increase in funding this year for a couple of projects that we think are needed. One is to complete our school security updates. As you know, these are a series of projects we've been doing to modify our entrances into offices. These improve access and the screening of visitors by providing secured entranceways. oftentimes what Eric and I will refer to as the man traps that we've put in place. We've been systematically going through, working with architects, and have addressed this in a number of our buildings past summer that we were provided some funding for, and we need some funding to go ahead and finish up those projects for us. As part of that, also from a security standpoint, we are replacing some of our exterior doors that just really need to be updated at various schools. We've also requested some additional funding, about $500,000, to address, there's a new mandate in Connecticut that requires us to provide visual emergency notification systems for students with hearing impairments. So this is in situations that may be a lockdown, that may be secure the school, any type of notifications, we need to have a light system put in place in areas such as cafeterias, such as gymnasiums. And so it's also a good safety practice for us in areas that may have difficulty hearing announcements, like band rooms, choir rooms, and such at some of our schools. And so we're going ahead and we're working with Jared Morin and the IT department, Eric, Bob, and I, and Mike Longo have been working on a plan to address a system that will tie into our existing notification systems for active shooter buttons, for lockdowns, and so forth, that we'll be putting into place across the district. The last piece that we are requesting in here is funding that is not for this process. As you know, we fund the CIP in a two-year segment, but we have included in here, beginning in 2022 and 23, we're requesting funding to address air quality in the elementary schools. We are beginning what we feel is important and putting money in there for a 20-year program that will really invest in our buildings for the next generation. As you know, many of our schools, most of our schools, with very few exceptions, have been around for 50 years or more. And we envision these schools being a part of the West Hartford community for the next 50 years. And in doing so, we have identified and feel that there is a need to address windows and air quality issues at our elementary schools. Our plan will be to do this over a 20-year period. We would budget and be able to implement. As you know, we're limited to working over the summer, so our goal would be to do half of an elementary school over each summer, and so systematically then in 20 years, other people will be up here explaining to other people about this project, and really though we're viewing this as an investment in our schools to continue them as viable for the next 50 years. And with that, I will turn it over to Bob to walk through some of our planned projects.
So as part of our planning process, we do a very a 3-year plan of where we're going to be spending where we intend to spend our money. So as you know, the CIP is a 2-year approval process, so this even looks 1 year beyond what we're really talking about tonight, what we're seeking for, but it allows us to begin the planning process for those projects in the future and to help us set the direction of where we want to be going. So planned projects for the next 3 fiscal years, they're outlined on the second page of your CIP document, the third page, I'm sorry. So at Brayburn, we're looking during the summer of 2020, which would be this summer, is to revise the main entrance for security purposes. The following summer, we would be looking to replace the roof, and then in the summer of 22, we would be looking to redo the parking lot at that particular location. For Bugby, in the summer of right now, we are in phase 2. This coming summer, we'll be in phase 2 of an existing security improvement project. It's a 2-year phase project, so that's what will be going on this summer. That's already been approved and is budgeted and accounted for. But in the following summer of 21, we'll be doing some playground paving on the play surface, some selected exterior door replacements, and Andy had referred to that as part of the security process. We have in some of our buildings the original wood doors from when the building was built in the 1950s, so we really want to get to those. They've served us very well over the years, but it's time to update them. In the summer of '22, we would be looking to replace the boiler in that building. Bug-B is an older steam system. When we look at doing boiler replacements in our buildings, we look to see if we can convert from steam to hot water. It's more economical, it's easier to control, and it's the technology for condensing boilers is really strong, and that's what we prefer to utilize in all our buildings. We've been trying to standardize to that across the district and and on the town side as well. So, at Conard this coming summer, we'll be replacing the visitor bleachers. We'll replace those. We'll be doing some select exterior door replacements there. In the summer of '21, we'll be looking to do some flooring replacement and some painting. And in the following summer of '22, we would look to do some restroom renovations, and we're targeting the restrooms that are, if you're familiar with Conard, the ones that are near the auditorium and the gym. Those are in dire need of some renovations. So, at Duffy, in the summer of '21, we're looking to do entrance security. And in '22, this would be the first building that we would choose to begin our fresh air and windows project. Duffy was built in 1955-ish, I believe. It has the original windows and the original ventilation system. It really has not been substantially updated since that time. So when and I think if you read in your background materials that I gave you, at one point during the 70s, during the energy crisis, they came in and eliminated some of the windows and infilled them. Those classrooms used to be entirely a window wall, basically, and they infilled some of that in order to achieve some energy conservation, which they did, but they also then restricted the amount of natural light in the rooms, and they also limited the amount of fresh air into the rooms, because those single pane windows are designed to leak air, and that's your fresh air system. So Duffy has been historically a very, when we have hot weather, because we have that second floor there, and there's really no shade around that building, it's very much exposed, and it's a very uncomfortable building. Especially on that second floor, as Mr. Moore can attest to. And we are in dire need of window replacement at that building as well. So that would be the first building. Again, we anticipate it would be a 2-year project. We'd be able to do half the building in one summer and then come back the following summer and complete that process. And then we would move on to the next building after that. For Hall, this coming summer, we would be looking to renovate the culinary teaching kitchen. We are also going to be doing a series of roof replacements at the building over the next 3 years. We intend to do sections each year. We typically try to do about 20,000 square feet of roof per summer. A little bit more perhaps if we're fortunate, depending on the configuration of the roof and that. So we're looking to do a series of roof replacements. They're all of similar ages at this point, and it's just time to do. So roofs typically are built up. These are built up asphalt roofs, older technology. We typically come back now with a PVC roof, which is a 30-year product. And we also typically add insulation, which gives us better energy efficiency, and it's also a white reflective, which reflects the sun, and again gives us better energy efficiency. So those are what the projects are there. Masonry repairs, we have been on an ongoing repair cycle at Hall for masonry repairs, and we continue to work our way around the building. We'll be doing that for the next 2 summers. We're going to continue to do some auditorium seating replacement this summer. We have flooring and painting in the summer of '21, and again, we'll be doing some restroom renovations similar to what we're doing at Conard. Those are the ones adjacent to the auditorium in the front entrance. Those are due for renovation. At King Philip, we're going to begin a boiler replacement project this summer there. That is a steam system. It's a large system, it's a large building, so we are going to convert to hot water. So it requires us to replace all the piping and the tunnel systems down below the school. So it is a very complex and large project. And again, we'll be converting to hot water, which will give us some pretty good energy efficiency. That is the largest that building is the largest user of natural gas in this town because of the steam system and the sheer sprawl and size of that building. So in the summer of '21, we'll be looking to do some security improvements for the entrance, auditorium seating in the summers of '21 and '22, exterior door replacements in '21, and some flooring and painting replacements in the summer of '22. If you've been in King Philip, you know that the majority of the hallways in that building are carpeted. During the 1990s, the philosophy was to, rather than abate the tile, which typically has asbestos in it, was to carpet over. And so when they did that, they just encapsulated it, which was a method that got you a good result. You get your new flooring. But at this point, the flooring is well beyond its life. It needs to come up. In order to pull that carpet up, we typically have to abate the asbestos tile and adhesives underneath it. So it's a complicated, long process. We've been doing this program for several years, really focusing on elementaries, focusing on getting carpet out of elementary school classrooms, and going with hard surface flooring, which gives much better indoor air quality, allows us to clean the classrooms better, and provide a better learning environment. So. At Norfelt, this coming summer, we'll be doing a flooring replacement there, along with some painting. We'll also be replacing the parking lot. We'll be doing some entrance security work in summer '21, and we'll also be replacing some of the playground equipment in the summer of '21. At Sedgwick, as similar to Hall, we've been doing a series of masonry repairs to that building. We'll continue to do that in the next 2 summers. We'll do some exterior door replacements as well. We'll also do some, in the older section, the original 1931 section of the building, we'll be doing some restroom renovations for those restrooms. At Smith this summer, we'll do some flooring replacement and painting. We'll also be tackling the main entrance security. At Webster Hill, we'll be doing some exterior door replacements, flooring and painting during the summer of '21, and looking to resurface the parking lot during the summer of '22. For Wedding Lane, we're looking at security entrance changes for this summer. We're also at the point where we're able to begin remove the 2 modular classrooms at that location. As CHIP's data indicates, there's a little bit of population decline district-wide, and there's some ability to remove modular classrooms. We take the advantage of that. These 2 particular ones are at the end of their life, and there's enough capacity within the building so that we can remove those. So we have just under, I think we're about at 30 modular classrooms district-wide right now. We're down significantly over the last few years. We've been able to remove about 8 over the last few years. The modular classrooms certainly serve their purpose. Their lifespan is typically 15 to 20 years. Most of ours are 25 or 30 years old at this point. They're a large maintenance problem because they're wood structures, so they require a lot of maintenance. They're also terrible energy conservation because they're electrically heated and have air conditioning, and they're not well insulated. So again, they're not designed to be permanent. I think we have one at Braeburn that's over 30 years old, so it's still there. So they certainly serve their purpose, but as we have the opportunity to remove those, we do like to do that if we can. So for Wolcott, we're looking this summer at main entrance security improvements, and again, we're looking at some playground equipment replacement. So that's some of the specific projects that we're looking at for the next few years. Any questions? Sure.
Thanks, Bob. I just had a quick question. I wish Dave was still here because finally we get the air quality improvements he's been looking for his. So if he's ever bored and watching this tape, shout out to Dave. What's the thought process once you get done with Duffy about where you're going to go next? I'm sure everybody's wanting to know that.
You could pick. I really haven't thought that far ahead at this point, so we would, we'll work together to come up with a solution. I really don't have one in mind at this point.
The only reason I ask that is because referencing CHIP's projections, as we continue this gradual decline, and obviously you can't rely on the out years too much, but is it me? It's me that's echoing. My only concern was, again, just thinking fiscally and not so much about the human empathy part of like people sweating to death in these buildings, but I would be concerned about picking a building that is on the lower enrollment side of things as far as some of these elementary schools. Like, is that going to be part of the thought process where it's like, well, if we continue in a downward trend and we don't level off, or we have a couple schools that are really on that borderline, are they viable that we want to? And I mean, we're talking, I understand, 5 to 7 years. Yeah. I assume those wouldn't be the ones we would invest hundreds of thousands of dollars into.
Yeah, we definitely will take all all the enrollment pieces into mind as we work out there, and certainly as we're talking about a 20-year process. So we'll have some much better information 10 years down the road for that.
Right, so when other people besides us are at this table, right? Well, I don't know about you, but I know I won't be here. So yeah, I mean that's the only thing I think about is like there are obviously certain schools or certain districts in town that I think the enrollment's always going to be there, especially with like high school and middle school level, whatever. But there's obviously just based on Chip's. I love history. His historical presentation. We're going like this, so like as we continue to go down, you know, people that are here 8-10 years from now. Have fun with that, but you know, if there's a school that needs to be looked at, I would just hope that we didn't just invest like $750,000 in it or something. That's all. I know you guys know that.
So I've seen, you know, a lot of these things on, you know, it's always on the painting, the paving and such. And I've, excuse me, I've asked this question in the past, and I know limited on flexibility, and I know there was a time a couple of years back where we were doing some paving where, you know, the prices just dropped out of the sky, and do we have that flexibility to do and move things like that if we can? And then the other thing too is painting. I know that we have, you know, painting is not a huge budget item typically, but it can be if you're hiring crews to come in and do the painting. And I know that we have in town, we have painters and such. Do we are we doing that organically here in town? Are we doing that, or is that hiring painters to do that kind of work?
Typically, when we do large scale painting, we contract that out. So in the past, we've had one. In the last 12 years since I've been here, we've had one painter. Who recently retired. So at this point, and we're not right now, we're not filling that position. But typically, when we have that opportunity in the summer to paint, so we do large blocks of space. Typically, you'll see it follows with the flooring projects because as we do flooring, we like to refresh the room as well, and then we do painting as we can. Sporadically to get that done. It's very difficult to do it during the school year, even though we're using low VOC. Non-oil based paints, it's still off gases, and it's a nuisance to some people. So it's very difficult to do it during the school year, unless it's off hours or during a break or something like that. So.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, and I didn't realize that the painter had retired, because then I was thinking, I understand the VOC issue as well, and then you think, well, maybe that particular skill set could be done second shift, and even not in a scaled weekend project, 2 days off during the week, things like that.
Yeah.
It's just thinking sometimes outside the box, and then having a 7 to 3 painter where it's difficult to get stuff done. And then on the windows, on the south side, it would probably pay off to put some low E things in as such. Is that consideration? Are we still going single pane? Okay, so
No. We certainly would go back with modern window systems that are highly energy efficient. Again, like you're talking about, low E, reflective, to keep that sunlight from getting that solar gain into the building. So yeah.
Know that I was at Duffy, and there's some areas there, and I think even at Whiting Lane, and there's that, I think it's the cafeteria where the sun just beats in and such. So okay, thank you.
On the paint, Mark, just one thing, like we have one now, but just a little bit of history. When Chip showed 1973, when we were at the big height of it, we're 117th in per pupil expenditures right now. So think about 1973, with that many more kids, West Hartford was #1 in the state in per pupil expenditures. But we also had in the past, during my time here, 3 and 4 painters, full-time employees, were just kind of always painting, I guess, somewhere. Because it is something I get asked a lot about with, why aren't we painting? And it's, well, because kids are there during the day, teachers are there, we're more aware of smells, everything else, and how it impacts us. So it's an interesting point. But there are also things, we get things sent to us. I got one a couple weeks ago, a picture, and I think somebody put it on Facebook with, look at this at Conard. And it was the Conard equipment, like shed that's kind of hidden away, and it's rusty, and yes, it is. It's not where we choose to invest our money, because it's just where we put snow blowers. So that's kind of those things that I think in the past may have been painted, but now we contract, and the benefit of that is we can do a 7 to 3 job and, not necessarily the same time. So.
Mark, to your other point about the paving, we do try to pick that up over the summer if funding allows, and really also what it comes down to for us is time allows. As you know, in the past we've been able to pick up maybe additional sections of roofs if projects are moving along and if money allows.
Nice. Thank you again. I have 2 questions. One, looking at the proposed plans that were proposed for February of 2019 and the projected plans, there were 3 plans that were postponed. I'm referring to Hall and Conard and Walcott. Just wanted to know, when projects are postponed, may that be because of wanting to have more efficient use of time, or may that be because a problem arose while planning to work on that project? Just curious, I just saw those 3 ones in particular.
The bleacher replacement.
Yeah, so the bleacher replacement was postponed for funding purposes. So the turf replacement at Hall cost a little bit more than we anticipated, so we had to defer that for a year. I think at First Stage and Auditorium, Wolcott's lighting system just got postponed again. The Hall sound system replacement actually ran a little bit higher than we anticipated, so we were postponing that. And I failed to mention that into the next. I did notice that I failed to roll that into this year's plan, so I will do that as well. And then what was the other one? Was the roof replacement at Hall was a structural issue that the engineers could not figure out in time for summer bidding and construction. So it's been designed, it's ready to go. We're ready to bid that out right now. So it'll go this summer. So.
Thank you. And second question, which I believe you answered, just looking over the material, and for example, on page 6 of the blue packet that was given to us, where you make reference to the elementary schools, and referring to several of them having limited air quality, air and air conditioning quality, along with inefficient single-pane window systems. So my thought was, is that because of architectural design or wear and tear over the years? And I know you made reference to, I believe, Hall historically having kind of that pan window piece, and then they filled it in, so that's more architectural design. But I'm also aware of some schools where they're not able to open the windows. I believe maybe at some point they were able to, but now they're not. So just wanted to know, for those, what are your thoughts with that?
Some of the window systems are the original. So like at Duffy, they're the original 1955 windows. So they're at the end of their life. We can no longer get parts for those, so we get parts made as we can, and that sometimes the windows are not operational, but we make at least 2 or 3 windows per classroom operational so that they can get fresh air. And really, the lack of fresh air in the buildings in the 50s and 60s, that was the standard of design back then. Today's buildings come with a modern fresh air system where they exchange air based upon the human occupancy. It's calculated out. The air handler mixes fresh air with the existing air, heating and cooling, and then it expels some and reintroduces fresh air back into the space. We just don't have that at a majority of our schools. So we don't have modern fresh air systems. So it was, it's the way it was done, and it was perfectly acceptable then. But it does impact the building's comfort of students and teachers and staff. So, and as we move forward with our buildings here, if we're going to be here in these buildings in the next 40 to 50 years, I think it's really time that we start looking at this as a problem that we need to solve, especially as we see extremes in the weather, hot and cold and other spells. We just need to take that into account. And fresh air, and air conditioning is a nice thing to have. The fresh air is important too, because that circulates fresh air into the classrooms and keeps the students and teachers and staff alert. There's lots of studies that support that, the benefit of fresh air systems in buildings, and so we were really trying to do a lot to improve the learning environment for our students and for our teachers too. So.
Thank you.
I've taught at Conard over the summer at the C Wing at Hall at the first and last month of the school year, which tend to be pretty hot. So your acknowledgement of maybe changing climate or hot days is appreciated, because as a teacher I know that it is uncomfortable, especially if you're the only person in the room wearing a shirt and tie. So it can get pretty difficult. I like the idea of moving towards fresh air systems. My knowledge of it is limited. At Hall, I think we called them dampeners, and they were in each room, and they are constantly cycling air. How would that be different from the dampeners that I've heard? And then secondly, if they don't do anything for temperature, are there ways to make it more comfortable in common areas, or pressure points where the temperature spikes to, like, let's say the high 80s in a classroom? Mm-hmm. And what can we do, or what suggestions do you have? Because I've heard from several PTOs that they have some points in their building that are pretty hot. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to is when you say dampers are univentilators. So those are what, especially at Hall, those are cabinet units that sit in each classroom. Those have provide heating and cooling. There's also a fresh air component to that. It has a direct outside intake and exhaust where it can directly pull air in and out. So those are a standard heating and cooling unit in classrooms. The newer ones are much quieter. That's 1970s technology from Hall, so they are quite loud. The state construction grants, people hadn't preferred those for years, but again, there's been some pretty significant advancements in that technology where they're much quieter and much more efficient. So there's some reason to, a lot of our schools have univentilators already, such as Duffy, and we would look at that technology as a possible solution there when we start to begin to design that. So as far as making the buildings more comfortable, if you can remove the humidity a lot of times, and with a fresh air system, there is that technology that if you just did a fresh air system, and you can also remove humidity, and you remove humidity, that does improve the comfort of the occupants. But if you're going to my thought process there is that if you're going to go that far, you might as well just add air conditioning too. So you're almost there. So at that point, you might want to just consider doing that. But that is a proven technology that some districts do utilize in the state. They have systems that are fresh air, and they also remove the humidity from the air. So
I guess my logic was, if we are going to spend a lot of money on a fresh air system, and we come back in and we've spent, let's say, $1 million across a couple schools, and we go, like you said, to the second floor of Duffy, and it's still 88 degrees. I don't know. Like, I may as well have just gone to Home Depot and bought 10 mobile AC units for a tenth of the price. I don't know. Yeah. Our power grid would not support it. It's okay. You're way ahead of me. Good. Okay, you've been down this road. I guess I'm just trying to think through it. Thank you for your answer. All right.
So not necessarily CIP, but and maybe for the edification for the group, the new science wing had some floor issues, and I think you're going to address them this summer, but if you could just talk about that and remind us what's going on there.
Sure. So we finished up a new science edition at Hall High School this past summer of 6 classrooms. So, and we had some flooring installation issues, in that the tile was popping back up. So we put the contractor on notice, and actually during this December break, they came back in and they did repairs, and so we've resolved that issue already. So, and the floor, it actually settled down quite a bit through the first part of the school year. So it wasn't as extensive as we thought it was going to have to be. So we were able to get the contractor to come back in. They did the repairs. Looks really great. So, okay.
If I could, Deb, one thing, and I just want to, there's new board members and people that haven't really had Bob present before, and I do want to point out that Bob, along with Rick and Jared, are 3 of the people that are shared with the town, and there are times I worry that we're giving them an impossible task, and I'm not joking with Bob. I mean, this is our part of the CIP, and you hear his facility with it and everything else. He's responsible for the town part of the CIP also, and all those buildings and all the things that come up and all of the planning and all the roads and not roads. You don't, but we still have to go. We have to go to the TPZ and talk about the roads and everything else, because the TPZ will review this before it goes to the town council also, and Bob. And I do just want to say, Bob's work in all of our buildings, his ability to identify problems, to plan long-term, just with what we've done with the science lab, but the security and the secure entrances in our buildings that have shifted over the past 5 years, Andy and I both at different points were like, well, we're never going to be able to put a man trap in this building. This just doesn't work. And basically we have a plan now for all of our buildings. And it's those kind of things. He is invaluable, and I didn't want the moment to pass without saying that.
Great, thank you. I just had a few things. One, I know that your communication internally among all departments is very consistent. So when you're planning all the windows and things, you're talking with the security team and Eric and all your teammates as well. Okay, just checking that off my mental list. And how much of do you have wiggle room as we're looking at school security improvements? I mean, thinking this is an area that I feel comfortable with the security side of things. So as I look through what we have and what we have planned, it's very reassuring, and I think we're very fortunate in our town. So if there were future recommendations that your team deemed that you wanted to explore, do you have enough built in there to explore some of those things if there were minor things here and there that you wanted to do?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you for bringing that up, because I do think that, again, Eric, Bob, and I work very closely on that, and I think that we've put the right resources in place. I think that we do have some ability to shift projects as they come up if we see the need, and add additional. One of the reasons we're adding the additional $500,000 for the visual system is because, again, that's a mandate that we hadn't planned for, but it makes good security sense for all of our students, not only those who may have hearing impairments, and so I do think that we're in good shape for this currently.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, because there are things industry-wide that something similar to that which may come up, that I was just wondering about the flexibility there. My other question is, as we as a community and as a school district explore options to reduce our use of single-use plastics, there's a lot of complexities to that. There are revenue generators, there's issues, dishwashers, equipment. It's a multifaceted decision, which I realize, but as we have those conversations, water fountains and things in the schools will not be a natural component of that. You have those in some of the schools. When you're looking at that scope to put in one of those in the budget and the things that go along with that and connected to the plumbing systems and electricity, where is that in this kind of a plan? Is that something is that going to be under a major renovation line item, or is that something that is more?
No, so as water fountains need to be replaced, we go to the modern filling station model. So we replace this, and that's part of our maintenance operations budget. It's not a capital item, so we pay for that out of building operations. So certainly as we do renovations, like when we do the restroom renovations, we'll probably replace the adjoining water fountains at those locations and convert those if they haven't already been done. So we take the opportunity when we're doing renovations and/or as units fail and we're going to replace them or upgrade them. We will do that install the newer systems with the filling stations, and they also have filtration, so which is nice. So we take that opportunity. So when water conservation is a big issue right now. With us, at least. So we're beginning to look at that, make that one in our energy conservation area. We receive some money from the town every year to do energy conservation townwide. We've spent a lot of time over the last few years looking at electrical use and going to LED lighting. You'll see it in a lot of our projects where we're converting from steam to hot water. That gives us energy conservation. When we do our roofs, we insulate, and again, we put that reflective covering on it. So we got very good programs going in that area. But our next, I think, area that we're attacking is water conservation and looking at our water usage, because the MDC fees are growing exponentially. When I first began 12 years ago, I think Chip used to say, oh, water's just a rounding error, throw 100,000 at it. And now we're close to $500,000 on it. So, and it's escalating a lot. So that really is the area that we're going to begin to focus on as far as a conservation area. It's interesting to note that we're with these LED lighting, which we're just completing up the final rounds of that right now. We used to, 5 years ago, we were at 21 million kilowatt hours per year for electricity, town and board. This year we'll be under 16 million. So it's over just about a 24% drop in electrical usage in 5 years. Some of it's from behaviors, some of it's from our energy management systems, but a lot of it's from LED lighting. So we're always looking at that. And any projects that we do from the CIP, we have an energy specialist who works for me. She works both for the town and the board side. We take a hard look at things. And if we have opportunities to achieve some type of energy conservation in that, we'll take those opportunities to do that. So.
Great.
And Amanda, I do want to add, this is something we work with Tim Brzezinski with our cafeteria also, where we don't necessarily announce it, but like right now at 2 schools, we're piloting with non-disposable dishes. Okay, well, what's the turnover like? What can our current employee staff get that cleaned, get the turnaround quick enough? And so we'll do that over a 2-month period of time. So sometimes we study it at different schools and see how we could extrapolate it out. Last year, in January, Tim came to me and said, what do we think about straws? And I'm like, just get rid of them. He said, should we do an announcement? I'm like, I don't want people yelling at me. Just get rid of them, see if anybody knows. And now I feel like I can say it. Nobody noticed, or they noticed but didn't complain. So those are the kind of things over time. I also want to mention water with Bob and this is, I think, Mark, you were on the board, but during the right after Flint water crisis, and Bob and Andy and I were sitting there that summer, and there's no mandates to test for lead in Connecticut. And we just decided we're doing it in our buildings and everywhere. And it was the strangest thing, because I had people, because it got in the paper that we closed off fountains in this hallway, and we did repairs, and it cost us a few $100,000 over time. But I had all these people, and there was one very contentious parent meeting where people were like, what are you covering up? And I'm like, I'm the only one doing the testing. And they mentioned another town, and they said, my brother says what's going on in West Hartford, and it was, well, they're not testing there. So I do want to reiterate, our water's been tested. Since you brought it up, we've gone through that process. We feel good about that. So, and we do continue, and you see more and more of the bottle filling stations in our building now. Yeah.
I think we just wanted to ask that question about the stations, because as we've gone around to different PTO meetings and we've been talking with parents, we're listening to them having independent conversations about things they might want to try in the schools, and knowing that there's a lot of good things happening behind the scenes that actually are being researched so that they can be scaled properly and be district-wide. We would hate to see groups of people go in all these different directions when really we might be making some strides. We just haven't gone through and talked to them yet. So there's a lot of good research going on. But as we look at a capital improvement plan, I'm just wondering, it's important that that's a big piece of it. So thank you very much.
Just while we're on the topic of energy efficiency, can you talk a little bit about solar panels and where we've put them in our schools? Because I know we have a lot of those, and where we might be able to do more of that.
Sure. So typically, as we do roof projects, we come back in the next year or two after that, after we've replaced the roof, and put on solar. So we don't like to own solar. So what we do is a power purchase agreement where we agree to a 20-year price on that. A third party typically owns the solar system, and we pay a pre-negotiated price over the 20-year period, which is typically well below the market rate. So we have multiple, if you go to our website and you either the town or the boards and you type in solar, it'll bring you to the energy page, and it will show you all our solar installations. So we began in 2009 in Bristow, was our first one. So we're about halfway through that term. We do have the option at the end of those terms to buy that system outright, so which seems logical. at this point. We'll see how the technology is and what kind of generation it's doing and stuff like that. But so we've been doing more and more of these as we replace roofs and we look at the suitability. So Sedgwick will be coming back there this summer to finish the next phase of roofing, and then that building will be ready to take a look at for solar. King Philip we finished last summer. We have solar going on this spring. That'll be our largest system in the town. It'll be about 600 kilowatts. That'll power about 90% of that building. So 90% of that power, 90% of the power for that building will come from those solar panels. So it's really a net mirroring kind of arrangement. So during the summer when we're not using the building as intensely, power gets generated and it goes out onto the grid. And then but it's really a financial transaction as far as the net. So Aiken, we did that a couple of years ago. That building again is probably about at 80%. We're generating the power. So we have large systems on Conard as well, about 300 kW. And then we have some smaller systems scattered. We have a smaller one up at Hall, a demo system. But again, as that roof gets completed in the next several years here, we'll take a hard look at adding solar to that too. So we just did this town hall building this past year. We added a solar system up there too. So any opportunity we have, we take a look at that. And again, it's the one at Charter Oak we do own, because on that project we did get 80% reimbursement from the state, so it made a lot of financial sense to do it that way. But otherwise, we do a power purchase agreement in which we don't own the system, we don't maintain the system, but we just get the power at a cheaper rate. It's made really good sense for us, and it's been a good financial model for us too.
So I'd like the board to consider, and Bob, about potentially adding a CIP budget item. This particular item has been probably in a 5-year, 6-year discussion with leaders in the community here and myself, and really didn't have a solution at the time. And it was something that's always brought up, and not really knowing how to go about introducing it. So they came to me probably a few years ago, and there was really never the opportunity. But the athletic or sports friends of West Hartford, about 10,000 youth kids and participating in the town sports, and their coaches and stuff that are kind of backing this and have used me as a tip of the spear, if you will, is to introduce potentially getting 2 more turf fields here in town. I had coached youth football for 5 years, and we lost the ability to light our fields. We had generators that we paid for privately, and we were lighting our fields at Sterling by Charter Oak. That went away about 2 years ago, and we didn't have the opportunity to do any practicing. And if you know, in the fall sports specifically, you're getting kids there at 5 o'clock as early as possible, and really by 6 o'clock and even earlier, there's times where you can't even, it's 5 o'clock, it's dark already after the time change. And it became a safety issue at that point. And so, the solution is, well, let's go practice at Hall or Conard. Well, it wasn't that easy. We couldn't get time on the fields to practice. What we did do, though, is we were able to practice sometimes in the gyms. When football, that's not necessarily the best. Or we would do film nights and go over films for practice. And then there are times where we would have 6 teams on a field at Conard. And we would all have, 5.5, 10 yards and sides. And that's not really conducive either. So it really became a safety issue, and that's when I was concerned about it. And we saw what we could do with getting the lighting. We were talking to the neighborhood, potentially just getting the lighting and pointing it towards Home Depot, if you will, and not side by side. That wasn't a solution either. And so again, the friends I don't want to use any titles because I haven't had permission to use all their names, but like the Friends of Football, Lacrosse, Soccer, even softball and baseball, that you have to go in. If you don't know, they use the gyms in order to get ground balls and do batting practice and such, because the fields are wet. And freshmen and JV football at Hall, where they practice now, is often underwater, and they can't practice there either, so they have to go to another field and use, maybe the size of this room just to get their practice in. And this year was particularly challenging because of all the rain we had in early fall. So, the high schools would benefit, the youth sports. We have 10,000 kids, believe it or not, participating in our own town sports here. I have personally seen the impact of not having additional fields. And it's something that, we only can put on a particular CIP budget once a year. And this only comes up once a year. It's not something that we could typically put in June and talk about it. Today is really the day to talk about it. I've been approached by many people, and my name went around. And I don't know if you're familiar with him, but Bob Macca is the guy that really got the lights done for both fields at Hall and Conard. And, he approached me. We met knowing that I was on the board and being a sports dad, if you will. So it's something that I would ask you guys to consider. It's something that I think, we invest a lot of funding into different programs inside the classroom, and we always do, and in safety, these things are critical. And I think, sometimes we, as a town, and we had this discussion earlier before, is during the break, is when you go to a different, maybe a different district, and you're looking at their facilities or something like that, and then you look back at West Hartford and what we have to offer on the education-wise, not necessarily facilities, it's second to none. And we're very proud, and we use it as our banner, our educational system. But part of that educational system, like anything else, includes other facilities that help with that participation. And I would ask to consider and discuss 2 additional fields, one at Hall and one at Conard. Not next year, but something that we can consider and put in planning down the road.
Just for clarification, are you asking for turf fields or lit turf fields?
Okay, yeah, so there would be turf, lit fields, and the reason the turf fields is to, with the rains and such, is we see the grasses, you can't utilize those fields. And most of you may know that have kids that play sports, the fields in West Hartford are shut down all the time. And they do it for a reason, because we have really good grass fields, actually. And that's part of the maintenance of taking care of them, so that you're not having, down by Home Depot soccer fields, you're not having, 300 kids running a soccer program in mud and then tearing up the streets. So there's a lot of reasonings behind that. And yes, lit too, because of the safety piece. And it's a fall issue, really. You don't need the lit fields in the spring. You don't need them in the summer. And but the fall is really when you get to utilize those, being able to utilize the fields, because a turf field that's not lit in the fall, really you couldn't use it either. So it would have to be both, and it would be a package deal, if you will.
You told me in October, you came to me and said, is this something you could bring up from the community? I said, absolutely, because this is, like you said, a community use, not necessarily Conard Athletics. Hall Athletics would be used by multiple people, so it's appropriate that you bring it up. But I did give Andy and Bob a heads up so they could spend a couple months studying the topic and going through locations of what costs. So if you want to hand that out.
We took the liberty of putting together, it's a double-sided sheet. It has Hall on one side, Conard on the other. It shows not only the placement, but also an estimate of the budget. We have what we would consider fairly good numbers on this, because it's based on Avon just redid their turf field, and so we're going off of their bid and their experience from last summer.
Yeah, well,
Sure. So we'll take you through this. I'll start alphabetically with Conard. So Conard, the practice field, we would, what we're proposing here is to locate it where the existing practice field is. And really what I did is I took the image of the playing surface and just kind of transposed that over to give you an idea what the sizing would look like. It's hard to exactly pinpoint where it would go. We'd have to, do work with architect and designers engineers and design to prep it. So based on the bid that Avon had, and they went from a natural turf field to a synthetic turf field. These were some of the costs that they received in their low bid and what they ultimately awarded. So engineering and design would be about $150,000. Field drainage and base preparation about $650,000. As Mark mentioned, our soils here are a little bit clayey. And not always suitable for construction. So, it depends on the exact location. I think obviously Hall has a bigger drainage issue than Conard would. The synthetic field surfacing is pretty standard these days. It would be about $800,000. Lighting is estimated to be $400,000. There's questions about whether you can tap into the existing lighting system circuits and that type of thing, or do you have to run a new service? So there's some questions to be answered there. I think in doing this, we probably would impact some adjacent fields and probably need to rearrange a little bit, especially if we do light poles for a safety factor. So we'd have to look at that, but that's for the engineers and architects to kind of figure out. But that's kind of what we are thinking there. So. Any questions about the Conard site? You can see the white roof with the solar panels. A little show and tell. Okay. So if you flip the page over, we have Hall. Again, we're estimating the same types of costs there. Again, I think there's the specific seems to be a little bit more room there, a little bit more flexibility with that site. But we do have a wet field there, very wet. That whole area in the back there is very wet. So that would certainly be a design challenge there. So,
Bob, is it the lights that went in, as I understand it, at Hall too? Some of the and help me with this. This is just going off conversations I've had with people. Is that it was anticipation of more electrical out there, so some of that stuff is the conduit and such is potentially out there already.
I don't know specifically about that, whether the capacity, the cabling that goes out there would support additional lighting. I think if you converted what we have to LED, because that's not LED lighting, then you would have capacity. That certainly would be a possibility. Then you could use some of that infrastructure already there to come out, which would reduce the cost.
I guess I wasn't talking about using the existing. I thought it was proactively more conduit was put out there.
Typically we do put a spare conduit in. So yeah, there could be. I could double check that for you. Yeah. So, yep.
I guess my one overarching question that I would have when looking at something like this is the health research. Just since it's not a natural material, and they're very common, I understand, but what's some of the health research that's been done as far as what they're made of or any impacts on how they're treated or maintained? That's just not something that I know a lot about, and would be one thing to look at in concert with this.
Yeah, because we've just redone the Conard and Hall fields over the past couple years, we did first when we first put our fields in, now going on 15 years ago, we volunteered our fields to be part of Connecticut's environmental department study for it, which came back at that point as safe. There's always been concerns about turf fields. They tend to be focused on an amount of hours on the turf field that we don't see, and also often in a heat situation that we don't see year round, and there's no conclusive evidence. That's the thing, is that I'm not going to sit here and say there's no concern. I'm not going to sit here and say there's a ton of concern. They continue to be built. They continue to be approved by the environment, the Food and Drug Administration goes, all the safety organizations do. We felt comfortable renewing it. We've looked at, there's this rice and coconut husk natural. We talked to a couple places that did it and it didn't work out well, just in terms of rain and mold, which led to another health concern. But I've talked to that. Bob and I have both spoken to the manufacturers who are always improving that. It's significantly more expensive, and the maintenance year in, year out is a little more expensive. So that's the give and take with it. But it's understood. Every time we build turf and look at turf, there's a question that comes up, and we use the latest research, which is what we have. And anybody that has a kid that plays, they have a breezeway full of little rubber pellets all the time because it comes out of their cleats.
So my question, I'm new to all of this, but the first thing that I thought about when we were looking in terms of the funding, the purpose of the fields. So there seems to be a purpose for the community, like the youth sports, to use the fields, as well as obviously the high schools. So I guess my question is, depending on the use of the fields or who's using the fields, would the funding for this fall under capital improvement of the Board of Ed or capital improvement of the town? It's a big expense, and I'm just wondering, based on who's using the fields, is that kind of a shared capital improvement?
I think that's a legitimate question, and I think that's one that if you were interested in including funding or directing us to include that for out years and such, that would be then a conversation that Bob and I would have with the town.
Which inherently, it's one CIP budget, so this is the one thing that you directly have authority in, that you can take things out. But once it's approved, it doesn't mean it's approved. I don't think it's ever come back exactly the same once it goes to the town side. So that is something they'd inherently have to sign off on. So it's unique. I get why Mark's bringing it forward here, because it is certainly our kids and people have come to him. And to be frank, when he asked me about it, I'm like, well, it's either here or the town council that has to kind of bring the issue forward, and then it has to go through the Board of Ed and the town council. Your idea of who's supporting it, who's paying for it, that is something. With the lights, we did get funding from fundraising over time. The issue is we still have to allocate the money, because when we go out to bid, it has to be allocation, and then the money that comes in can be a reimbursement for it. The problem is, once you put the lights up, the energy to fundraise for new lights kind of disappears,
A good point, and I didn't mention it, but there was a component of fundraising for this. The appetite for that was great, and that these community leaders were talking about actually helping with that as well, just like they did with the lights that were at Hall and Conard first time. That was part of a fundraising program. So the appetite's there. I can tell you that the soccer league was looking to put in their own turf field lit and finance it 100% themselves. So just to tell you what the demand is, and what kind of fundraising potentially could be out there. I certainly wouldn't promise any fundraising, because I don't know what could, I don't know what types of they can do or anything like that. It's just a matter of that I know that their appetite for that is great, and they've done it before and it's proven. So,
if I could go off that as well, I'm lucky enough to work at a school as a fall soccer coach that has 2 turf fields, both of them lit, and they're still full. With AYSO programs like youth soccer, and I'm wondering if you've talked to towns on what their income is like. I know it's going to be pennies compared to this, but if they're pulling in income from permits And if it's worth it to have maybe a steady stream of income, if a third site, maybe off-site from either of the high schools, would be of interest to the community, and maybe therefore not a Board of Ed thing. It's not that I'm not interested in it, it's just that financially, it actually could be, more interest to the town and the community groups, and also have a somewhat steady stream of income for the repairs that are needed that come with a turf field. So I was wondering if Avon or whatever group that you've talked to has talked about any permit income levels.
We haven't had those discussions with them, but we certainly can reach out and ask them about that, what they do. We do, our current turf, our synthetic fields, our leisure services people do some rentals on those, and I'll also pull that information from them as well, so.
There's some tournaments from it. I mean, I do want to, not to get too far ahead, remember, anything would have to go through planning and zoning, as would lighting, and that's just a reality. That's a long process. I've done that before. That's a long meeting. I went as assistant superintendent, so I assume I wouldn't have to do that again. But that is something, obviously, neighbors, that's a piece of the process here also. And so that could be, as you stage this out, when you're looking at a CIP long-term, there's definitely benefits. Do it all at once, then you could do this and this, or you could do one. I mean, there's different ways to do it. Typically with lighting, if you're putting in the field, yeah, you can run it all at the same time. It makes more sense to do it that way, typically, but that would be something for the engineers.
So interesting, again, getting involved in this. They were talking to me about light bleed in neighbors and such, and they said, hey, Mark, go down there, and you don't pay attention to it until someone tells you, because you go down there and you get on a lit field, and if you look at say Conard, for instance, the light bleed from that, and Bob, maybe you could even talk about this a little bit, but the impacted area where they're potentially putting this new turf field, the light bleed almost you couldn't read a book from the light where that potential new field would be. And when you look at it, it's, I guess, the technology or however it works, and I guess there's LEDs coming, but the light bleed from old light systems, 20 years ago to now, if you pay attention to it, it really is not as impactful as originally thought. So it was just something, I went down there, I was like, wow, it's really actually pretty dark over here, right next to the lights. So it's interesting if you ever drive by with the lights on to see it for yourself.
So the engineers spend a lot of time trying to figure out exactly how to light that field, and to make sure that you're not having light bleeding over into the neighborhoods. And also our zoning laws require us not to do that, so that light doesn't leave the site. And now with our current lights are not LED technology, but with LED technology, I think you can refine that even more to get that spot on the field, and so that it really just lights the field. So the technology and the engineering improvements are certainly there to support that.
So Bob, you mentioned the LEDs. Let's just go 5 years down the board, and we've got two new lit turf fields. Would the project include, in your mind, with the cost savings, that LED would go back, or is that already being considered for the turf fields that exist now, or?
We're not looking at those right now. Those lights were installed with a 20-year warranty, so we were just looking. They're not. They use a pretty good amount of energy, but it's not at this point cost effective to go and do that until they get once we start to have burnouts with them. So at this point, we're not looking at that as an immediate project.
The TPZ also did put a limit on the number of events we can have, that the town can have, and the time that the lights have to be off by every night, which we've, of course, honored. We made that commitment when we went there, so that's something that's also part of the TPZ process, which
I think it's 8 o'clock or something, or 8:15 or whatever it might be. But there's
X number of nights per year that can go past 8 o'clock.
Right, but I've had my kids out on the field, and the janitor comes and
Yep.
And it's, that's it.
Bob can do it from his phone.
Oh, yeah. Well, I felt bad. He had to walk all the way up, and you're doing it from your phone. You got to give him that technology.
Are there remaining questions on the specific projects in the CIP, or, okay,
I guess
Amanda, and then Sean.
my question is just, what's the process for talking about this? Because I can see.
We're going to do the process after.
Okay.
So projects.
Process, okay. Because I appreciate you bringing it forward on behalf of the community, because I can appreciate why you did. I hear it also, and then there's also the positive effects on childhood of encouraging kids to unplug, be outside, be in organized sports, community gets to know each other. So I can see the positives to it, but with the complexities, I think that's just in timing, that is a piece.
Thanks again for bringing that issue up. As a coach, I definitely see a need for it. But I wanted to ask one more question. As I went through this, I just was completely overwhelmed, and I respect you guys so much for being able to just handle this, because I would not be able to. But you mentioned roads, which I am familiar with their process because they have a color coding system, so I know what road near me is kind of next up. It might be blue or red or brown or whatever, and they code it. And I was wondering if I could kind of get a peek behind the curtain on how you guys decide what comes next, because it seems overwhelming to me.
We meet with each of the buildings and the principals, and usually we'll do walkthroughs and identify different projects. And again, it depends on what it is. If it's flooring, if it's painting and such like that, the principals are acutely aware of where their needs are. Not many of them spend time on the roofs and have an understanding of which of their systems are in need of repair, unless you're Ryan at Morley, and then as the water's coming through, you're acutely aware of the need to repair your roof. So really, it's a combination of working with Bob's staff, working with Mike Longo, working with our maintenance crews, and then also working with the principals to identify and prioritize. And there's some things, as you see from year to year, things that we have planned that we may have planned for 2 years down the road that we have to move up, because in the spring we'll identify that as a more acute need, or something will change and we'll decide that's a bigger need than another project which we decide can wait another year. Again, we're limited with most of our projects to that short summer window. And so, the question is, well, if something happens in May, why don't you just do it that summer? Well, by the time we go ahead, involve architects, involve bid packages, go out to bid, we're not able to hit that window of being able to start June 20th.
And then things happen with Bob's budget during the year. 5 years ago, we had one snowstorm after another snowstorm after another snowstorm, enough so that we had to hire to shovel our roofs, if you guys all remember when that happened, because we were past the load of our buildings. And so those kind of things then all of a sudden impact that year, that moves things off for another year. And so not necessarily capital improvement, but his own budget that kind of fits in, because this is the capital improvement plan for the things that are non-recurring expenses in the large projects, but he also has his budget for the things, the toilet broke, we need to get that fixed, so.
And there's sometimes, as you've seen, for those of you who have been with this for a couple of years, there's sometimes where we'll have a project, we go out to bid, and the results we get back are well and above what we anticipated. And so we'll either have to try and reallocate funding from somewhere else, or we'll say we're going to let that sit for a year and we're going to go back and re-image it and decide where we can try and get a better handle for the expense.
So let's chat a little bit about process. So our CIP gets rolled up into the town CIP, and is that funded by regular town taxpayer dollars, or is there bonding that helps to fund that? Are there state grants, depending on what the project is? What's the process for funding all of these different things?
So it's not funded by taxpayer dollars. Most of it is funded by long-term debt. The majority is from bonds. We also take advantage of any grant opportunities we have, particularly as it relates to school construction grants or any transportation grants. For example, the project that was just done at the Park Road exit was primarily done by grant funds. In addition, we do some projects that don't qualify for bond funding through CNRE funding, our Capital Non-Recurring Expenditure Fund, and that is more of a taxpayer expense each year. But those projects are somewhat limited. They're smaller projects that really just don't meet our criteria of issuing debt. But the town does issue debt every year for CIP. Our CIP is based on a long-term debt financing model, and that is really how projects are evaluated and then approved for funding.
And then just to be clear, it is, though, taxpayer dollars that pay back
Of
the
course.
long-term debt obligations.
Of course,
Yeah,
and so
okay.
those bonds are issued over a long term. Principal and interest is repaid every year. And correct, as you said, that is funded by our annual tax revenue.
Thank you. Are there other questions about process or any other questions about the capital improvement plan?
I guess just about this and potentially getting it on there for further discussion, even with the town and ourselves, so, excuse me, but maybe.
Yeah, so what I would say is you'd have, what we'll do is we'll include this as a motion attached to the CIP, not including the CIP, where you'd vote on the motion to include this into the CIP. When you vote on the CIP, then you'd vote on the CIP overall, including this or not including this. That would be.
Yes, except that tonight you're just accepting
Yeah,
it.
no, I just mean for the next,
for
no,
the
I mean
one,
next
yeah.
meeting.
And you would just have to direct us as to which year you would like it loaded in at and at which.
And
at
would you
which
go
level.
school by school? Historically, the truth is, when you do something at one of the high schools, you try to build the same high school at the same time so that something doesn't get pushed off and all of a sudden there's a cut and one high school has something long-term, the other doesn't. But when you're talking about this kind of funding, if you win at one high school first and the other high school, is that reasonable, Bob, to go one and then the other one, or would you put them together, or is there? Because sometimes you get bid help too if you put it together.
Yeah, there's some economies to be gained by bidding it together, like we did when we originally constructed, so.
Truthfully, it wouldn't be in the 2021, you'd have to talk about the 21, 22, or 22, 23. Really, with the process to go through the TPZ, you're talking about a year-long process to get everything done. So I defer to you, Bob. We've done this together, and Andy, but 22, 23.
Right, you have to have a pretty firm design when you go through the TPZ process. So you would have to go through a pretty substantial design process in order to figure out the layout, how it's going to fit on the site and all that. Those are details, and a lot of details are going to be needed for the TPZ hearing process. So you're absolutely right. So it's a year probably for design, another 6 months for TPZ at least, 6 to 9 probably. So you're looking at a long process.
So then, therefore, we would need some of the money in 1 year and then not the rest of it until the next year.
Correct, yeah. You would need some design money up front, and then you would need the construction money after that, so.
Just, so would you say 21, 22 for design money and then 22, 23 for the
construction
of the money, construction?
Right.
Yeah, something like 1 million, then 3 million.
3 million, if you were to do it.
Sure.
Well, you can.
I guess I'd like to make a motion, or.
I don't think you need to till the next meeting, because we're not voting on anything tonight, so, yeah.
I think you could just.
Since we're presenting it anyway, I don't think there even needs to be a motion on it.
Well, thank you very, very much. Very informative. And we'll look forward to talking about this again in a few weeks.
Great. Thank you.
Moving forward to item 5C, adoption of the annual board meeting schedule for 2020-2021. The recommendation is that the Board of Education review and revise as appropriate the proposed annual board meeting schedule and adopt a final meeting calendar for the 2020-2021 school year. And this is on page 8 of our booklets and page 9. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second? And discussion?
Deb, if I could, one thing, just historically, and I just don't know how to put it in as open January. The January 5th meeting, that board workshop should really just say January. It's almost never on the date that it's planned. That first week in January, I don't think in the past 6 years it's ever been on that date. Just that's a bad time for people. So it's really an open January meeting where we do a workshop, typically legal issues with Tom Mooney. You know, there's been times we've done some other things attached to it, depending on it's at the board's discretion. So just so everybody knows, you don't have to necessarily block off January 5th.
So, new state legislation law about graduation day, right? And I know if you're a Facebook guy or gal that a lot of people are asking about graduation already, and the answer is April 1st, but can you just go over that?
Yeah, so this is just about your board meeting dates, but I'm glad you brought it up because while the calendar's facing us, I can address those two things. Andy and I have been talking about it. A month ago, we were like, we're going to have to set it earlier just because of concerns. The concern for us, which I said before, was safe grab, but as we get closer, we understand. We've said April 1st in the past, but I think both Andy and I feel comfortable that probably at the next meeting or the meeting afterwards to introduce, which would just be a motion, it's purely to the board to set a graduation date, which we would then lock in. It has to be 180 days from the start of the school year, so you set it at that point. So we can do that in February if that's something you guys are hearing from. That's a board prerogative, so I'm not opposed to that. So that's something we can certainly talk about. I was going to put that in this week's update when I email you. Second thing I do want to call your attention to, because it's something else we'll need to address, the school calendar for 2020-2021 is November 3rd is the National Election Day. We've already talked about this with Primary Day, and we said we'd have to address this at some point. And we will need to address it, I would say, probably in February, the beginning of March, to look at this. One proposal that would be out there would be to make November 2nd the in-service day, because we do have to, teachers are contracted for 185 days. So it doesn't have to be that day. It could be before school starts. At the end of school, that's not really a great professional development time, or it could be at any day in there. It has been brought up to me before that having that time in November, or you could pair it in October, around the 12th somewhere, because A, we need to plan for it, but the other thing is that does give people a good chance to do a college visit if they wanted to in high school over a 4-day weekend at some point. So I just want to put those ideas out there that we're going to need to be talking about, and we'll talk about more images at your discretion about what days.
Okay, any other questions on the board meeting calendar? It's okay. All right, if there is no further discussion, we can vote on the motion to adopt the board meeting schedule for 2020-2021. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Abstentions? The ayes have it. Motion passes. And we will move into the superintendent's report.
Okay, this will be very quick tonight, because they already said exams. Martin Luther King ceremony, you can see the art that's in the hallways. This was yesterday. Our own Isabella Gomes spoke at it and did a great job. An inspiring day, which I think makes us all want to do better always. And the messages certainly reflect that. I also want to point out on Friday, I was lucky to attend the Kid Governor inauguration along with our own state delegation and Senator Blumenthal and Governor Lamont, where Myra Stanfield, Norfeld student who was elected Kid Governor, was sworn in. And we're very proud of her. And with that, exams this week, which was already stated, please, study up.
Thank you. All right, we will move now to the graduation requirements presentation we've been waiting for over a month. to have this conversation as it was on our December 17th agenda. And I know that just means that Paul and Ann have made their presentation even jazzier.
If I could, this is for people that are new to the board. We've talked about this a lot. This is from old legislation that goes back a ways, and really what happened is that nobody really believed it was going to take effect because every year it was delayed for 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. There are certainly some very good parts of the bill. There are also, I'm left with, they're changing our graduation requirements. There's not a college, university preparation program that believes our kids were not prepared, and now we do have to increase the credits. There is a financial reality to this situation that we have to start reflecting in the budget in our planning, because with more classes means more teachers. And so Paul and Ann will talk about that.
Thank you. And before we begin, interestingly, I got a text from Chip Ward, and it reads, please let Dr. Morrow know that he is the record holder. Not sure what that means, but I'll ask him later. If you've lost track, I never get to say this, please turn to page 41 in your board book. And we'll talk about graduation requirements, which, as Tom addressed, it's really a report that's in accordance with Public Act 17-42. And in accordance with that act, West Hartford Public Schools updated its graduation requirements effective for the class of 2023, your current 9th grade class. You did so back in February 2019 when you updated your board policy 6310 to be in alignment with the new state law. And tonight's report is the second update from us relative to that new board policy. And as such, we'll do a couple of things. First, we'll do a very quick, concise review of those new graduation requirements, especially for new board members. Then in terms of updates, Ann is going to talk to you about the mastery experience, what progress we've made on that, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about the overall impacts, certainly information that you'll want to know as we move into the budget season, and open it up for any discussion. So, the new state requirements basically have changed the minimum credit requirement, pushing that up to a total of 25 credits. As you'll see in a moment, the West Hartford credit requirement previously was 21.75. The new requirements across the state of Connecticut really added two new pieces which were not previously included. That is one credit in world language, and one credit for a mastery experience or capstone type experience that you see there. There was an increase to existing requirements to health education, state mandated. And the other thing they did that was significant was they changed the structure of the overall credits from really being individual course specific to being in these umbrella categories of humanities and STEM. The one thing that really didn't change in these requirements is the requirement for civics credit and for arts credit. So you can see that in a little bit more detail on this slide, which I know is kind of busy. But what we try to do is we try to parallel using these umbrella categories of humanities and STEM and other requirements on the left-hand side, reflecting those requirements for the class 2023, our 9th grade class. And over on the right-hand side are older sunsetting requirements, which are actually in place for the current sophomore through senior classes. So we've maintained the 4 credits in English. We've maintained basically the same structure within social studies, requiring a credit of U.S. history, modern world, half credit in civics, and then a half credit elective. None of that is different, just the concept that those will total up now under a total of 9. So we've already sort of identified 7 of the credits for students. We add in the 1 world language requirement credit of 8, and we have the half credit of arts, which was previously listed on our old requirements as a full credit of either arts or technology or a combination thereof. Just bundled in this way, there's essentially a lot of similarity for humanities, and the students would have to identify at least another half credit under that humanities umbrella within their courses in order to hit the 9. Under STEM, we're maintaining that 3 credits of mathematics. Under this model, your board policy increased the science credits to a total of 3, whereas previously they were 2, specifically 1 in life and 1 in physical. We are maintaining that we still need to have 1 in life and 1 in physical, but we'll talk more about how students earn 3 science credits. And then there's room for 3 additional credits, which can be anything under science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. Health, you see that was added from a quarter credit, moved up to a full credit, and we reduced our physical education credits to allow some flexibility there for kids, dropping it from 1.5 down to 1. We add in the 1 mastery experience credit, and we see that the room for general electives goes from 7 unnamed, kind of pick and choose anything that you like, down to 4. At a minimum to get to the total of 25. That is your board policy. You see how it conforms to the state requirements just described on the other page. And that hopefully is kind of the review of where things were. So at this time, we'll talk about the big piece, which is the mastery experience, and then we'll talk in general about other impacts, and I'll have some specifics before we open it up to discussion.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. I'm here to talk about the Mastery Experience credit and the way we put it together for you. And this is a very new feature, something we haven't had before from the state. And in many ways, it's the most exciting part, at least to me as an educator, because it is a credit students can earn for exploring and becoming a master, I guess you would say. It's a credit they can earn by exploring a topic of their own interest, and they demonstrate a command on a set of skills that can be locally determined. And as we saw our young presenters here tonight, remember our young book turner children, and we think about how they were so excited to pursue a project, an independent project of their own that they just love. And look what they've done with it and all the skills they've used to get there. It kind of, when I was listening to them, thought, wow, this is like a mastery experience program for a young child. So when we think about this, children are going to earn 1 credit. It doesn't have to be associated with seat time. For mastering a set of locally determined skills. So what we started with is I gathered a group of educators this summer to come up with our vision of the graduate. We had a vision of the graduate in the past, but we refreshed it, and the graphic on the page shows what we've come up with at this time. And we've also shared this with our professional learning and evaluation committee, with leadership, with our department supervisors, with our teachers, and we have identified 8 different skills. 4 of them are attitudes and dispositions, and 4 are academic skills. And so students will pursue a project in which they will demonstrate mastery of these skills. It's kind of exciting because, as we said, it's not tied to seat time, and it can be of your own interest with your own direction. So that is what the mastery credit is, and you might say, well, how are students actually going to earn this credit? So we have identified multiple pathways for students to do this. So they can do this in their own time, somewhere between their sophomore and senior year. They can take a course that is designated as having a mastery experience project associated with it, and they can do it through a course. And most of the courses that are on our list are elective courses. So you think of a child who finally has a chance to take an elective in high school, and they're so excited to take that elective, whether it's ceramics or European history. And many of these courses will now have the opportunity to do the mastery experience project right inside the course. It might be your own independent research paper. It could be your own piece of publishing that you're going to put out in the world and be published. It could be a ceramics project that you enter into a competition, for instance. We're working with the teachers throughout the spring to identify what we're going to call task models, or let's say models of what these will look like, and they will be available in many of our elective courses. Another way to do this is through badging and credentialing. We want to lift badging and credentialing to a higher level so it's more prominent for students. Right now, one of the badges that, or I should say the credentials that is most available to students is the Connecticut Seal of Biliteracy, which we're very excited about this. And there's also a global seal of biliteracy. And we worked with our World Language Department and our ESOL department over the last few months, and right away we identified 150 students in the current senior class who are eligible. And of those 150, about 120 students want to pursue it, which is pretty interesting. Of the 120, 30 or 40 already have done all the credentials because they received a high enough score on their AP World Language test last year, and they are getting 4 credits of English. So it's very exciting that many children will be able to walk out of high school with a real badge and say, no, as an industry standard, I am biliterate. I think that's a really neat thing. Not only what students know, but what can they do with what they know. And we are exploring badges and credentials in other areas. There are many that we can lift and start to shine a brighter light on, including things such as the emergency medical response certificate that students can earn after taking the EMR course. They can sit for a test and say, I'm certified to have certain skills in EMR. Doesn't make them an EMT out on the street yet, but it is one of the steps. And there are many, many badges like this that we will continue to look for. You can imagine many in technology like Adobe certification and Microsoft certifications. There's WISE financial training, and there's ServSafe in the culinary fields. There's many, many different really cool badges, and we think this will have an opportunity to make students very proud of their work, very visible. A third pathway will be for students who really need to go through a course and work on project management and kind of have a little more support along the way. We're going to offer a course in the senior year called the Mastery Experience Seminar. And students will take the course with the express purpose of working with a teacher to work clearly on an independent project and finish it in one semester. We also are exploring internships, approved internships in the public. We haven't put that on the list yet. That still needs some work to develop. But that's an overview of our multiple pathways to earning the Mastery Experience credit. It will be 1 credit for showing mastery of this set of skills. And we are still in development, but we've had a lot of help from teachers. I had a curriculum writing team meet with me this summer, and we have a collaborative inquiry team meeting throughout this school year. And I've been working with teachers individually who already do many of these projects in class. And with some other features, they will qualify for the Mastery Experience credit.
Okay, so other impacts beyond and updates beyond the work that's been ongoing with Mastery Experience, and I really need to thank Anne for her leadership on that component of the project. That's one of the biggest parts of this, and her vision has been invaluable. Tom kind of mentioned in the introduction to this that while the genesis for some of the changes to the graduation requirements from the state came kind of looking statewide at the strength of transcript has never been a significant issue here in West Hartford. And so with that, it did cause us to look at what are the ways in which we were providing credits in comparison to some of our sister districts out there. And one of the differences that we observed had to do with science credit. Historically, because science classes take up more seat time than other classes because of the lab structure, other districts in Connecticut were providing them more credit commensurate with the seat time. And in West Hartford, we had never done that. We had never had a need to do that. Now, with the concept of 25 credits coming and the need to raise the number of credits that students are being issued, it caused us to look back at that science piece and say, hey, under this new requirement where now every student needs to reach 25, is it fair for us to not give them credit in association with the commensurate seat time, because they really don't have the periods in the day to attack that otherwise. And if we don't, do we then need to look at the schedule and revamp either how we're teaching and delivering science, or look at how we're teaching and delivering everything. So with that, we came to a decision that we would afford science classes 1.5 credits, when in fact they have labs, when in fact they have 7 or 8 meeting periods per week. And it did offer us the opportunity for us to look at some of our elective science classes in the 12th grade years and make some decisions about what required. Did it require a lab, or were there certain courses where we might say, hey, 5 days a week is sufficient relative to the content that we want to get through, so that we are able to provide students the opportunity to take a full year course or another semester course, not being interrupted by, sort of periods that would have to go towards either SRP, self-regulated program, or study hall, or PE or health. So that was one of the more significant changes. That should be realistically a cost-neutral change, and it does help with our program overall. As you know, health and physical education, we did reduce the total number of credits required for physical education by 1/2 credit. We did increase the amount of health education to align with the state requirement by 3/4 of a credit. So there's a net increase there of a 1/4 credit, which means at the end of the day, there will be a requirement for students to be taking health and physical education year-round, whereas in the past, students really would typically have a semester off from that in their senior year. So there will be a modest increase to FTEs as students transition into that requirement, but that impact may not be felt for a couple of years until that junior or senior year, and we see that bump in the number of sections that are required. That being said, it just bears reminder to the board that a couple of years back, through input from the board, we were asked to look at the program delivery and physical education overall, move that to more of an elective program. So that's been happening in concert with these changes, and one of the things that's happened as a result of that is the delivery of our health in both 9th and 10th grade. So rather than a standalone health class that the current sophomores, juniors, and seniors are used to seeing, our freshmen this year were engaged in a wellness program, and our sophomores next year will also be engaged in wellness. So the first 2 years is a blend of physical education and health education, as opposed to static, this is your PE for a semester, this is your health for a semester. The reason I share that is because typically there were students that would avail themselves of get-ahead credit in the summer, trying to free up some space in their schedule by taking health over the summer. That's still going to be available, but really we're targeting postponing that by 1 year. So instead of doing it in the summer between your freshman and sophomore years, you would typically, if you're trying to do that, typically do that between your sophomore and junior years. However, we recognize that there are some students that might want to try that, so we're sort of trying it out with summer school this year. Special education, when we've done our credit analysis to really see how this movement to 25 was going to impact us, we found that by and large for the very, very high majority of students, the movement from 21.75 credits to 25 credits was not going to be an issue. The majority of our students received 25 credits or more overall, and I think that formed some of those discussions were some of our early reports. The one population most at risk, of course, was our students with disabilities, and primarily because of the way in which we deliver services for those students in a non-credited environment. So we've worked very, very closely with Gretchen Nelson, our Director of Pupil Services, and it's kind of in concert with a program review that she did a couple of years ago of the resource program in general. And we are looking now to both crediting some of these special education courses that are being taught, along with enriching some of the curriculum that's associated with them. So we have courses that are being offered in developing executive functioning skills. We have other courses that are more specific to the individualized learning targets and goals in a student's IEP, such as content support or direct teaching on literacy strategies or on math strategies that are being done by a specialist. And in those cases, those courses would be credited as a general elective credit, counting towards the total towards 25, so that those students are not disadvantaged in any way. We are required to provide specialized programming for them, and we are making sure that it is a high quality curriculum associated with it and that they are being credited for it. As that develops, that's always something that we're looking at relative to, really just the improvement of those services. What does that mean for FTE structures in terms of, having kids that are in credit-bearing, highly specialized classes that align directly to their learning goals as identified in their IEP. So that may be a piece. I don't think that there are broad increases, but it might be a slight contributor. Grade level and credit distribution, that's in there kind of really. It's just as an informational piece. With the movement from 21.75 to 25, there's more credits, so there's more credits required to accelerate from a freshman to a sophomore to a junior, et cetera, et cetera. It used to be that you needed only 4 credits to move from freshman status to sophomore status, so under this new framework, it'll be 5 credits. Likewise, to move to junior status, it's 11 credits. And to move to a senior status is 17 credits, which is a net gain of +2 and +2 in those 2 years. That's really not for anything more than kind of sorting kids out into various homeroom type settings. So, Reach and Strive are 2 specialized high school programs, and they bear some conversation. Reach is our dropout prevention program for students, I hesitate to call them regular education students that do not have an IEP, and Strive typically for our students with disabilities, usually associated with some behavioral issues.
Just to jump in the coming weeks, we're going to have presentations on Reach and Strive, just so all members are fully up to date on.
Excellent. It just bears mentioning here, obviously these 2 programs are not immune to these 25 credits, and these are the programs where students really, when we look at transcript studies, we're eking out those 21.75 credits. And the opportunities within the programs, because there's a lot of credit recovery and some things of this nature that sort of identified students and put them on track to, hey, this is going to be a better setting to help get you there, didn't always afford some of the electives that we'll need to have. So world language was a piece that we've talked about needing to add. We've recently added it this year to the REACH program. We're looking at that as a requirement and a necessary component of the superintendent's budget for the STRIVE program. The availability of the arts credit was one also. We can sometimes, students will come in with varied electives and varied credit status for that based on when they're coming into these programs. So ensuring that we have the opportunity for students to gain an arts credit, and also the delivery mechanism for health. We've had a couple of more sections of health available to students within REACH, and we will need to program equivalently for STRIVE. So this is the area out of anything, I think, because at Conard and at Hall, our transcript studies have shown students were generally achieving 25 credits, so it's sort of maybe just a remixing and matching of what those credits might be. It's generally FTE neutral at those 2 high schools. In these 2 programs, there'll be some modest adds to the budget that the superintendent will report, and as he said, we'll have a more in-depth presentation on those programs specifically. And lastly, the mastery experience that Ann so adeptly described to you, as we think about how that's going to be coordinated, how that's going to be tracked, how we're going to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks and there's no bad news being delivered in late May and early June for any child. We are talking about what positions that we have might be revamped, if there's any associated costs with that, in order to ensure that we have a coordinator at the 2 high schools that has an eye on our students, that helps to manage some of these externships or some of these credentialing programs, some of these experiences that might be outside of our school system in order to really achieve the vision of what the state sees and what we see as a mastery experience for students. So those really are the big story impacts and efforts, get you up to speed on where we are, and we welcome any discussion on this topic.
Thank you very much. Are there questions around the table? It is 10 of 10, so it's not saying not to ask any questions, but go for it.
Shall I start? Sorry, I've got a lot. You mentioned the transcript studies, and I remember that there are some really highly motivated students out there and really busy teachers, so I'm going to kind of double up here. For the teachers, would we issue this as like a 0.2 as a part of their schedule, or would maybe hire a specific person, as you mentioned, like a coordinator to handle all of them, whereas maybe a 0.2 part of their schedule, a teacher would handle maybe 10 students? Just wondering what your thoughts were where we're headed with that in terms of losing staff or adding more staff. And then on the student side, I remember there's a lot of busy students too who are enrolled in all kinds of classes, and some of them are skipping lunch. So I was wondering if during your transcript studies, of the 20, of the students that are meeting our standards for graduation or exceeding them, how many don't have a lunch? Sure. So thank you for your answers.
Let me start with the lunch question, and I'll go back to the supervision question and the program coordination. In the transcript studies, and I'll apologize, I don't have all this data fresh in my head, but we certainly looked at students who didn't have lunch, and we looked at many ilk of students. You have what's typically called that art student, that music student, that computer student, and so on and so forth. And we were very concerned with how would these changes impact some of that programming that really has been a trademark for us as a district. And through those studies, when you see, that's, and I'll talk about the music student, the student that was really in multiple of our select performing groups and so on and so forth. Oftentimes, we were concerned, are they not going to hit, they're high up on the humanities credits, are they going to hit the STEM? Those same students were getting all their STEM stuff. They were in, generally speaking, the majority were in, the highest levels of math and science. And those were the folks maybe because of their real passion, they were skipping lunch in order to avail themselves of all those opportunities and graduating with 28, 29 credits. And as Ann has pointed out, with the design of our mastery experience not being a seat time requirement, the students really only need to accumulate 24, quote, kind of seat time credits. So we found that in general, while that exists, and I can dig numbers and bring them up at another update to this if you prefer, it wasn't a significant number of kids, and the graduation requirements themselves did not seem to preclude students from being able to pursue those interests that we've become, really become a staple for us as a district. Switching in terms of how we would coordinate, we've talked about this, we're in the early stages of it, but one of the models that we're leaning to is a more centralized person. But we have, with that, we as opposed to like a 0.2 here, and here across multiple departments. The idea that Ann has currently talked about relative to teachers is with mastery experience projects that are offered across all disciplines, really looking at our CSI calendar time and looking at a department lift to evaluating and sort of judging some of these so that it becomes a shared responsibility with built-in time in our calendar so that no one teacher is overburdened. And, whereas somebody else, hey, just by virtue of having these classes, I don't have to do that, and creating something that might be considered inequitable. Thereby, we can have a single point of contact at a school, potentially, really looking at some of the logistics, tracking, running reports, working in concert with our counselors and our building administrators to make sure that nobody's left out.
And I think one thing to note with that addition is that it will roll over the next 3 years. So it's not like next year, because next year we're still talking about the sophomores, then so this is something that will be additive year by year, and each year that we do it, we learn a little bit more. But I think it's fair to say that for a significant percentage of the kids, just like the literacy seal of biliteracy, if you're an AP capstone, if you're an AP research, AP seminar, you're going to meet it in that course by just naturally. And there's tech ed courses that you're going to meet. So that's the thing, is that we're kind of really will be a little bit in the dark until we see, as kids have gone through, exactly what avenues did they use. So we'll have to be flexible with exactly how that kind of master of mastery works,
Sorry, if I may to add to that, I think next year will be really telling for us, because the ninth graders have heard about this in advisory, and they've had a big presentation from their principals, and they're starting to use the word mastery project. Oh, no seat time, I get to do what I want. Oh, okay. But also scared and nervous. And they're meeting with their counselors to pick classes this month. But next year we'll see how many children enroll in a mastery experience course. And we'll really get a sense of that. And so this, as Tom said, will continue to build. And I think a centralized coordinator will really help us with coordinating special projects that don't take place in the classroom, externships or internships that kids might be interested in, and then overall helping with the coordination in the building to make sure that although there's projects in all different departments, they're substantially similar enough in their components that the children demonstrate this mastery experience of the vision of the graduate. And so a centralized coordinating person is the way we're thinking of going at this time.
I just wanted to say, I think the way that you approach this whole initiative, it's really an indicator of how thorough everyone works. I mean, between the teachers and the administration, I think we all know that when mandates come down, people can approach them a lot of different ways, and you dug in, you looked at how to make it relevant and applicable and exciting and stimulating, especially that mastery experience, and it's a real trust builder. I think as a parent, I think it's fascinating what you've done with the mastery experience, and please convey to the faculty who spend a lot of extra time on this that it's really appreciated.
Thank you. From what you presented, you certainly have fleshed this out quite well. Question, recognizing the promise of the Connecticut Seal of Biliteracy, that sounds great. I think that will be very validating to the young people. And reflecting back on last year, where the second World Language Supervisor position was approved and implemented, would you say that addition has facilitated moving in this direction?
I think that having the second person has been instrumental in moving the seal and the global seal of biliteracy. Not only that we need the extra man-woman power to do the lift, but we were lucky in our hire is also incredibly well connected with the ACTFL organization, the American Council of Teachers of Foreign Language, as well as its Connecticut counterpart. And so we were lucky on both levels. We've got more woman power in this case. And we also we're lucky to have a great hire who has a deep knowledge of this and in fact, we might be one of the only schools in Connecticut offering in its first year, children will be earning both the global seal and the Connecticut seal. And she tells me that they don't believe any other district in the state is ready to offer both seals in 1 year. And I'm just amazed at our young people. 120 responded to a letter that went out to them saying, would you be interested in this? It looks like you're going to get your English credits. You could take this test, or you've already taken your AP test. And so many responded. And this isn't even for mastery credit right now. These children are seniors. So they're just excited to say, I'm proud of myself, and I can show this both on my diploma and on my transcript that I am biliterate. And it's really raising just the importance of being biliterate.
I just want to echo that, and I want to add a name to that. Jocelyn Tamburillo-Noble, who's our new hire in World Language, and working hand in hand with Megan Zingle. Without them, we would not be so rapidly at this point of Seal of Biliteracy. We had this as a stated goal. We had talked about it as an executive team last year, and they came in, and it was like Wonder Twin Powers activate, and they got it done. And kudos to both of them.
I have to say, it's just wonderful to hear how a vision is coming to fruition. So thank you so much for all that you're doing. And Jocelyn as well. Jocelyn as well.
I manage the capstone program at my school, and part of the last component is sharing it back to the students or not just the faculty. I was wondering, with this mastery experience, will there be any student share out with the community, with their fellow students? I don't know.
So it is a component we're thinking about and we are talking about, but since many will be done in class, we believe that the share out will be mostly with faculty at the school. Now that wouldn't prevent a teacher from creating a model. For instance, I'm working with a teacher at Hall right now who is helping to develop a model that it has to do with publishing. So students would, in a creative writing class or in one of our writing classes, the mastery experience wouldn't be getting published, but would be submitting for being published. And so that's certainly sharing with an audience. And then there are many other of the test models that have a natural audience built in, but they don't all have a natural audience. So this is kind of the tension between trying to find those projects that exist already that are special and lift them, but let them have the integrity that's making them special as they are now without saying it has to be one way, like you have to share out. So we're going to find those natural fits where their audiences are there, but they may not all have that.
And I can imagine that our principals will talk about, community type school-based events where maybe they're showcasing significant numbers. Obviously, we think this is an area that's intended that students will showcase themselves in their college essays and applications, and I'm just resting easy at night knowing I have ample students to come forward for student participation.
I also have one final question, which is going back to the summer school implications. I know we operate a regional summer school and students from a number of different districts come here. With the science classes that have a lab moving up to 1.5 credits, will those continue to be offered in the summer as well? And how might that impact students from other districts who don't have that same credit alignment for sciences with labs?
So yeah, really for science, no change in terms of how we're offering in the summer school. And just to mention it again, for health this year, we're offering, we are kind of offering it the same, but we want to advertise that get ahead in health kind of thing will really shift. We're not precluding students this year. But for science, no real shift. The offerings are the offerings. How we've offered them in summer school with the labs remains unchanged. Our award of 1.5 credits simply means that if a student takes this and they're at another school system, the school can choose to take the full 1.5 credits, or they can say, no, we only accept 1 credit of that. In the same way that we do, we review other transcripts from other school districts, and we award credit accordingly based on our analysis of what it is and how it fits in our district.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, thanks very much. We will now move on to routine matters, and we'll move to the financial report. So Liz is going to come join us again. This item is to approve the financial report for the period ending November 30th, 2019, so almost 2 months ago by now. And the recommendation is that the Board of Education approve the financial report for the period ending November 30th. And I believe it's my turn to present the financial report. So, turning to page 48 in our booklets, I think that's I'm going to skip over 47 given the timing. So turning to page 48, if you look down at the bottom, you'll see that we are estimated to have a balanced budget at the end of the school year. Again, this is only 2 months into the school year, as a reminder, November 30th, or 3 months into the school year. We're estimated to have a balanced budget without a surplus or a deficit, knock wood on that. Just a couple of variances that you'll notice. There are some in the salary line items. Some of those are due to hiring lags. There's a vacant position in technical support under 5116, hiring lags for 2 vacancies. For nurses, 5131. For a while, we had 2 vacant positions and we were contracting out, but we've now filled those. There's a hiring lag for a couple of custodians and also for maintenance. So that's where some of the variances come with salary. I also wanted to point out under teaching assistants 5185, you'll see that we have, we are projected to overspend by $25,000 in teacher assistants. Some of this, and this gets tied in with the line 5319 below professional technical services. So let me explain how those get tied in together. We have had a little bit of difficulty filling the teacher assistant positions. These are typically people who are hired to fill very specific needs for children with special education needs. And so we've had some trouble filling those, and we've been contracting through CREC for 11 of those positions. So we have a little bit higher expenditures under contracted services, but we expect that we'll be able to hire those teaching assistants fairly soon. So that should tidy things up. Also on this page, 5345, pupil transportation continues to be a challenging line item for us. This just continues to increase if we have special needs for a student who's outplaced or needs to be on a smaller bus, then transportation costs increase, and there's just very little that we can actually do about it, unfortunately. So those are the main items on page 48. Are there questions on those before we move ahead? All right. On the next page, this is the state and federal grant accounts report, and as a reminder, the line that goes through about the middle of the page is to remind us that above the line, these are the first year of 2-year grants. Below the line is the second year of 2-year grants. So we fully expect to spend out those grants below the line by the end of this year. The ones above the line, we have 2 years to spend. So we'll have some money left over this year that we are able to roll over into the next school year. Are there any questions on those? All right, special funds report. Not a lot of changes here. The summer school just kind of got trued up as far as what our expenses and revenues were for that program. Preschool tuition, we continue to run over our budget for that. And again, that's tied in, as we spoke earlier tonight, about the grant that we get from the state that actually limits how much we're able to charge in tuition. So so that's why we tend to run high in that program. Skipping ahead. Any questions on that page? Great. And now we get to the good stuff, nutrition services. And we're doing really, really well on nutrition services this year. So I'll call your attention to the third and fourth column in the table. If you look at November, we are projected to have a $70,506 surplus compared to last year at this time, which was $32,866. We are selling, we've sold fewer lunches this year, but we are doing very well as far as revenue and expenditures go. You can see our operating margin is about 5.94%. So we have a healthy balance for our healthy foods. Any questions on that or on the rest of the report? All right. So we are then looking for a motion to approve the financial report.
So moved.
And any second? Further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Abstentions? The ayes have it. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the approval of minutes. Looking for a motion to approve the minutes from the regular board meeting of December 3rd, 2019. Can I have a motion, and then we can have a motion, a second, and then we can have discussion. And a second?
Second.
Amanda? And any discussion?
Just a couple quick things. Just wanted to mention that we talked before the meeting about an area in the final paragraph towards the bottom that starts with Miss Corselli, and there's just some phrasing in there that there's some typos. Oh, I'm sorry. Page 2 of the minutes, and that's going to get smoothed out. It just looks like there's a couple things missing there. And then we also wanted to add something about how the board encouraged the district to help parents understand the goals of this initiative, and particularly with computational thinking by just helping to offer some concrete examples, just so it helps them learn as they go. We had talked at the end of when we got to the computer science conversation, we just...
Were you on here?
Oh, this was in addition to the minutes, that just adding, just something that wasn't reflected that I thought was helpful to have in there. We talked about it earlier, so thought we could make those changes. And then on the second, on page 3, just correcting the spelling of Gavin Sherry's name to Sherry. That's it.
Thank you. Any other items for discussion, amendments, edits? Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes as amended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Abstentions? The ayes have it. Moving on to information and reports. Board members, communication and reports. Are there any reports from other boards and organizations that anyone would like to share?
I just want to I recognize the late hours, so I just wanted to certainly acknowledge the MLK celebration that took place on Monday, and many persons here did attend that, and it certainly was a wonderful event, and especially because our young people participate in that. And with there being a keynote address and also a student perspective, I think it gives us an opportunity to hear from a student's perspective what their thoughts are. And I think that really does show what a wonderful school system we have in that the young people feel comfortable and confident enough to truly speak their thoughts and their words. And I also think what makes our district wonderful is that we receive it and we try to grow from that. I don't think that a wonderful school system represents one that is void of challenges. I think it is rather one that recognizes when there are challenges, let's do something about it. And so certainly honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his famous quote that the true measure of a man is not measured in times of comfort and convenience, but in times of challenge and controversy. So I certainly employ all of us, all collectively, to continue to do that. That means listening to our young people, even if some things that are said are a bit challenging. Nonetheless, it still does remind us of the work that we have to do.
Thank you. All right. Any other information and discussions? All right. Amanda?
I just wanted to note that some of us were able to attend the kickoff sessions for the Family and School Partnership Series, and those were very well attended. People were engaged, they were well done, and it's obviously an indicator of a good work that's been done, being done, and will be done. So,
great. Thank you. All right, future business. Announcement of future meeting dates. Our board will be meeting next Tuesday, January 28th at 6:45 up in room 400 for a board workshop. This is not a board meeting, but we will have a workshop. I believe Tom Mooney, the famous Tom Mooney, will be presenting to us. Then our next two board meetings are Tuesday, February 4th, and Wednesday, February 19th. So just note that that's off from our normal meeting schedule. Both of those meetings will be here in Town Hall, 50 South Main Street, right in this room. Are there any requests for future agenda items? Okay, and are there any comments from visitors? No visitors left? All right. We are going to move into executive session for an issue related to privacy, and so we expect will be about 10 minutes, 5 minutes. So we are going to stand in recess. No, we will come back in, though, in about 5 to 7 minutes. All right.
Paul, you explain.
I call the meeting of the Board of Education back to order, and I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Lorna, and seconded by?
Amanda.
Amanda. Any discussion?
No.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned, 10:33.